All set? Good morning. We'll call the meeting to order. Supervisor Bishop will lead us with the invocation, and Supervisor Angus, the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity to gather today. May everything we do begin with your inspiration and continue with your help. We ask for your guidance throughout this meeting, that all of our thoughts and actions would reflect your will. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Board of Supervisors may, by motion, recess into an executive session to receive legal advice from the board's attorney on any item contained in this agenda pursuant to the Arizona Revised Statutes, portions A3, 4, and 7. The Board of Supervisors may, by motion, recess into executive session to discuss and consider items noticed on the agenda with an asterisk pursuant to ARS Revised Statutes, with authorized discussions and considerations of employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, demotion, dismissal, salaries, discipline, or resignation of a public officer, appointee, or employee of Mojave County. At this point, we'll need a motion and action to call for an executive session to be held on December 17th, 2018 at 9 a.m. for discussion and consultation with legal counsel in accordance with the Arizona Revised Statutes, portions A3, 4, and 7, to discuss items noticed on the agenda with an asterisk.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? There being none, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion carried. On to official business, discussion of pending legal or contemplated litigation claims and demands. Mr. Esplin?
Nothing to report to the board, thank you.
Thank you. Committee and/or legislative reports. I'll start on my left. Supervisor Johnson.
Nothing this morning, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Supervisor Bishop.
Yes, I'd like to report that I enjoyed the company of a job shadow last week, Mackenzie Powell. Mackenzie, are you in the audience? Okay, she thought she might be able to attend today, but obviously she has school. But it was quite an enjoyable experience, and we visited with Ryan Esplin, the county attorney, and we went down to the elections department, and she visited with all of the executive staff, and I think had a quite educational day, and we hope that she'll come back and maybe work for Mojave County in the next 10, 20 years. So, Mackenzie, if you're watching, thank you very much for sharing your time with me.
Very good. And did you attend the 4-H presentations on Friday evening?
I certainly did. I attended and helped hand out awards to the 4-H recipients, and that's always a pleasure to do that. And, of course, I was all over the county over the weekend and did the Humane Society fundraising dinner and was in the Christmas parade and just had one heck of a good time.
Sounds like you had fun. Thank you. And thank you for covering for me at 4-H.
You're welcome.
Supervisor Angus.
Thank you, Chairman Watson. I do have a report. There's been some activity in regards to the BLM's Kingman Travel Management Plan. And Bob Smith, who is the chairman of the Public Lands Commission that we put together, asked me to read this into the record. On November 26th, Doug Wisdom and I met with Matt Driscoll at the BLM Kingman Field Office. We discussed different ways to use GPS tracking of the travel management plan. We were also informed that BLM has switched its focus from Plan C, that we were all familiar with, to Plan D. I see this as a great step forward. Instead of 1,630 miles of closure and 554 miles of limited use with Plan C, Plan D has about 832 miles of proposed closure and 205 miles of limited use. Matt said this change has occurred because of the large number of comments made, well over 1,000. On Tuesday, a small group of us went east of Blake Ranch Road to look at the trails that are projected to be closed under Plan D. We found that several of them had not been used in a very long time. Some of them we could not find at all. Not sure if they ever did exist. We did find one that they wanted limited ATV, UTV motorcycle, and I agree with their assessment. Did run one in a wash that should be left open. We will be making a comment to BLM about it. I plan to keep doing this research in other areas with small groups and encourage others to do the same. I want to thank all of you for your hard work and overwhelming support in getting this far so quickly. It has been simply amazing. Going forward, I hope that the PL and R Commission can have workshops that will allow OHV user groups to get together to get better awareness of the travel management plan. Information that is obtained and shared at these workshops should give BLM a better picture of what is actually happening with recreation on the public lands. Thank you again, Bob Smith, PL and R Chairman.
Very good.
That's very good news.
Good news. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you for all the hard work. Supervisor Gould, report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to take a point of personal privilege. I wanted to thank the Public Works Department and the road grading crew in the Yucca area for grading Butch Cassidy Road and for the grade that they've done on a portion of Alamo Road. They're a whole lot better than they were a couple of weeks ago, and I wanted to thank you for the hard work on that. I also took possession of the two offices, the Lake Havasu City office and the Fort Mojave office, the day after the meeting, actually the same day. It was interesting, the Fort Mojave office has 3 flat screen TVs. I thought that was rather interesting that there's 3 flat screen TVs in a county supervisor office. I will be remedying that and we'll be canceling the subscription for Dish TV. We're not there to watch TV, we have things to do, and if it's some catastrophe that happens, we can pull it up on the internet. So we'll probably be shipping those TVs back to the warehouse. So if anybody needs a TV, apparently there will be some available. But thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Gould. County Manager report. Mr. Hendricks.
I have no report today, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Approval of the October 1st, 2018 Board of Supervisors meeting minutes.
Motion to approve?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Questions or corrections? There being none, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carried. I have a request this morning to alter our agenda to pull item number 43 before the consent agenda. I would entertain a motion to do just that.
So moved.
We have a motion
Second.
and a second to move item number 43 to the front of the agenda. So our attorney, Lenore Stewart, can make recommendations on that. Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carried. On to item number 43.
Mr. Chairman, I brought this forward. A constituent came to me and asked about it, and that's why I was bringing it forward to, if the board wanted to refer it to the county attorney's office, but maybe the county attorney's office has jumped on it already.
Okay, the chair will recognize Lenore.
Thank you, Supervisors and Chairman Watson. Again, Supervisor Johnson, this question arose through your office, and I did have the opportunity to do some research on it. It regards a tax exemption for a church, a local church in Lake Havasu. And the matter has been researched exhaustively at this point, and I can go forward and make some explanation and also a recommendation for the board's future consideration. If that is something that you would like to have happen today, Supervisor Johnson, or would you prefer to wait until the next agenda?
No, if we can get her done, get her done.
All right. So we do have a church in Lake Havasu that has requested some tax forgiveness. This resulted from the church taking title to the property in 2015, but not exercising its option to file for tax exempt status until 2018. This resulted in the accrual of taxes, delinquent taxes, and then the sale of a lien on those delinquent taxes to two different private investors. We are talking about two different properties, a small church that is in a storefront building that used to be an accounting office, and then the parking lot next to it. So both together are now owned by Inspire the Church, Inc. is the proper name of the owner. So Inspire the Church, Inc. received tax bills in 2016 and 2017, did not pay those bills. This resulted in the property being included in the tax lien sale and our February sale for those years. And one parcel has been purchased by a private investor for the tax years 2016-2017. The second parcel has been purchased by a different investor for the year 2016 only. The owner has requested now forgiveness based on what could have been tax-exempt status had the church filed a timely exemption. In Arizona, statute requires that churches, religious organizations can be tax-exempt as long as they meet certain criteria, and one of those criteria is that they file an affidavit with the assessor's office. That did not occur here until 2018. So current status, the church is tax-exempt. We are only talking about tax years 2016 and 17. 18 has been moved to exempt status. The statute that's being relied on by the property owner is 42-11109E, and that does provide in very limited and certain circumstance that if a nonprofit organization holds title to property used primarily for religious worship, fails to file an affidavit required by an earlier section in a timely manner, but otherwise qualifies for exemption, the County Board of Supervisors, on a petition by the organization, shall direct the county treasurer to, and there's two provisions here. One is to refund taxes already paid if that request comes within 1 year of payment. That section clearly doesn't apply here because this owner never paid taxes. And the second one is to forgive and strike off from the tax roll any property taxes and accrued interest and penalties that are due but not paid. Those two provisions go together. The property taxes that were due but unpaid have since been paid by an investor. So in actuality, we have very few taxes that remain due but unpaid. For the total amount of the payoff for one of the lien holders is $1,668.04. The second lien holder is $5,031.84. The taxes that remain unpaid would be only the 2017 on parcel ending in 138. That amount is $4,990.96. The tricky part here is that the statute pertains to someone who has paid some tax, requests a refund, and then any remaining amount that may be due and owing but not yet paid. So for instance, if you paid one installment of your tax, you could seek a refund of that tax if you applied within the year, if you're an appropriately exempt religious organization, and then also moving forward get forgiveness for the second installment of that year. That is not the situation we have here. We have years' worth of delinquent taxes that have accrued. The tax notices were ignored, the delinquent notices were ignored, and we have two private investors. So at this point, it is my recommendation that the Board of Supervisors not consider any relief under 42-11109E because of the owner's failure to avail itself of the statutory remedy available in a timely manner. We have case law supporting that in Arizona. We have a long-standing series of cases dating back to 1966 that indicates that although churches may be tax exempt, That is not self-executing, meaning that they have to do something in order to avail themselves of that tax exemption. That didn't happen here. So the statute is to be read to provide relief to a religious organization when they have paid some tax and timely apply within a year of that payment for a refund of what they've paid and then forgiveness of any remaining amount due. It is just not the situation before the Board of Supervisors, and as you move forward and consider this, I would recommend that the board take no action. The other reason that I make that recommendation is because we now have two investors and thousands of dollars tied up in investment at an interest rate that would also have to be repaid. And if this board chooses to go the route of forgiveness, then Mojave County would actually be responsible for paying back these investors with interest. And that essentially could be construed as a gift. So for a multitude of reasons, one is that the property owner did not avail himself of the statutory remedy in a timely manner, and also because we have private investors involved that would further entangle any forgiveness of this tax obligation. The only appropriate, legally responsible, and prudent thing to do is to recognize his exemption for 2018 forward, assuming that he meets the requirements for maintaining that exemption, because that's when he applied for it. Earlier than that, I think that the property owner has to either be responsible for essentially not availing himself of the statutory remedy, and that is still possible. He could redeem those tax liens, those lien holders himself, and still maintain his church property. So I'm available to answer any questions, but again, my recommendation is that the board take no formal action on this, either at this meeting or a future meeting.
Mr. Chairman, if I may?
Certainly. Supervisor Johnson.
Is it possible that this board, without harming the county in any way, forgive the taxes that are due in 17 that haven't been picked up by anybody?
Well, in order to
that
be able
legal?
to do that, you would have to read that statute differently than any court has read it. So in other words, the forgiveness part, you would have to interpret that to be a standalone provision. That is at odds with how the courts have interpreted it.
All right, so it's only if you pay the taxes.
Yes, so if you've paid, you can seek a refund within 1 year, and then you can also forgive any other installment that is due or owing. Assume that you've timely applied for and received that exemption through the assessor's office.
So by not paying the half of 17 that wasn't paid, that doesn't qualify then?
There is, again, a remainder of tax that is due and unpaid for 2017, but the statutory authority to forgive and strike off from the tax roll comes from a statute that requires a property owner to have paid and seek reimbursement. After they have paid and seek reimbursement, they can go the next step, which is to forgive and strike off from the tax roll. Any interpretation that would skip all of the preceding information and go directly to forgive and strike off from the tax roll would be inconsistent with the statute.
Thank you. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Lenore.
Right.
Supervisor Gould.
So would there be any chance that the church could redeem their liens and then come back to us for forgiveness?
Yes.
Is it the 1 year limit that's boxing us in that point?
Yes. So yes to the first part of your question, the church owner can redeem those tax liens and maintain his property. No to the second part of the question, because the only statutory authority requires that the request for reimbursement come within 1 year of payment. And that would be the owner's payment, not an investor's payment.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Further questions? No?
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Supervisor Johnson?
I would just let it die from lack of action, Mr. Chairman. I had explained to the the applicant that we wouldn't and I didn't think the board would go for going back and giving money back to the investors. And I said the only one that was possible would have been the ones that weren't paid. And obviously, if the law isn't on our side, it's not something we can do. So I would just ask for no action.
Very good. Thank you, Supervisor Johnson. Okay, item number 43, dies for lack of action. We will go back to the original agenda. And now we will have call to the public. Those wishing to address the board at the call to the public regarding matters not on the board agenda must fill out and submit to the clerk a call to the public request to speak form. They're located in the back of the room, and they need to be filled out prior to the meeting. Pursuant to the Arizona Revised Statutes, a public body may make an open call to the public during a public meeting, subject to reasonable time, place, manner, and restrictions to allow individuals to address the public body on any issue within the jurisdiction of the body. At the conclusion of an open public call to the public, individual members of the public body may respond to criticism made by those who have addressed the public body, may ask staff to review a matter, or may ask that a matter be put on a future agenda. However, members of the public body shall not discuss or take legal action on matters raised during the open call to the public unless the matters are properly noticed for discussion and legal action and are within the jurisdiction of this board. I have several people signed up to speak this morning. Steve Robinson.
Stephen Robinson, 5373 Highway 68, Golden Valley. 9 months ago, the Supervisor Johnson brought an issue back before the board from the previous month's meeting, which had to do with the postponement of discussion regarding planning and zoning enforcing unwritten requirements for the animal kennels, and that he used that occasion to make a personal attack on a friend of mine, of Jackie Chevalier, based upon allegations in December. One of the things he showed was a photograph of her property that was in his presentation on March 5th.
Mr. Robinson, can you turn the picture a bit? Or they're doing it for you? Okay.
There. That was a picture of the property months before she moved back. Here is a picture of the property when I went out to clean one small part of the property, and it shows that the property was almost immaculate, except for this little section in the back of the property. And when I cleaned it 1/2 hour later, this is what the property looked like. It was thoroughly clean, and it only took 30 minutes to clean it up. But Mr. Johnson, you went after her about a totally unrelated issue, the animal control issues. And I thought that that was obscene that you did that. And then what happened is there was a meeting in July where they talked about enforcement of unwritten requirements, and Mr. Esplin aptly stated that he had instructed planning and zoning to only enforce the rules required for issuance of animal control permits. Bringing the issues up, and today later we'll be seeing some issues about of abatement, garbage abatement or issues and filing liens against people's property. Well, I want to show you some pictures of a piece of property in Horizon 6, or Donkey Acres. This is a picture of one of two parcels of land owned by Supervisor Johnson. Now that one doesn't look too bad, it's just some dirt. But here's a truck that's been there for years with a flat tire. It's an eyesore to the community. Here's a picture of a well driller's unit that's been there for 20 years. And last but not least, this is a picture of the tire under that. Now, if we're going to go after people and make sure that they clean their properties like they did on my friend Jackie Chevalier, then we need to apply the law evenly to all people, including supervisors. Thank you.
Robinson, did you go onto my property? Because I've had burglaries out there where sheds have been broken into and a vehicle is missing. And so these pictures must have been taken while you were on my property illegally. It is posted no trespassing.
Chairman Watson, if I could just interject, we can respond to criticism afterwards or talk about other things, but I'd rather not have a Q&A during this time.
Right, if we could restrain until after the call to the public.
Well, if I'm being accused of theft or robbery, you're absolutely wrong.
Mr. Robinson, thank you. Mr. Boone.
Good morning, Board. Michael Boone, 2210 Palo Verde North, Lake Havasu City. I have a question about public records requests. Is there a policy or procedure on what records that you're not going to release and what you are? I understand when Mr. Esplin responds back to me on email about attorney-client, but I've got a couple of different public records requests where documents were provided to me, missing documents that are already known to exist that have been in other reports that I have sent to the board. In the public records request I have a separate page that says in there, if there's any reason for not releasing those records, could you state the ARS statute or the county policy, or give some explanation as to why the records were not released? Because it gives the impression and the interpretation that things are being withheld, which, as you know, is a violation of the ARS and actually a felony. So is there a policy that can be disseminated as to who's going to be the final say in the records release? Why records that have already been in front of this board and shown, such as emails, were not included in a records request? And some kind of explanation as to why that particular record or that particular email is not going to be released. I think that's not too unreasonable to ask. If you read the Q&A on the state attorney's office, it talks about records should be released in the benefit of the public unless it has an adverse action against the state. And it says in there that it's better to err to the public than not to err to the public. So I've got at least 6 or 7 public records requests, and these ladies upstairs do a phenomenal job. I can't speak highly enough of the work they do under trying circumstances to get this stuff done. But there's obviously numerous records that have been omitted. I'd like to know who omitted them. I'd like to know why they were omitted. And in the future, if it can make it part of your policy, that when you return public records, if you're not going to release something, at least give an ARS statute, a county statute, or some logical reason as to why it wasn't released.
Thank you, Mr. Boone. Penelope Townsend.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Supervisors. My name's Penelope Townsend, 2247 Golden Gate Avenue here in Kingman. I'm a volunteer at the Western Arizona Humane Society here. I'm here to bring attention to the Mojave County and Kingman Animal Care Center, better known to everyone as Western Arizona Humane Society, where Ms. Bishop said she came to our fundraiser, I believe. Thank you. It was built in the 70s, and I think for an intake of about between 20 and 30 dogs and probably cats. I'm not sure about the cats. In 40 years, it's really ready for some major improvements and extensions of the kennels. The public recently rallied together and bought a cat house, so we had room to put in the never-ending stream of cats that are coming in. I'd like to give you some statistics. Between 9/25 this year and 11/26, there were 670 animals taken into this facility. That's 77.4 per week, 12.4 per days that they're open, which is 6 days a week. There were 259 adoptions, 96 returns to their owners, and 165 transfers to other facilities. The euthanasia comes in 3 different categories. The owner requested was 45, sick and injured animals was 22, and aggression and failure to thrive was 49. These animals don't ask to end up here. Ideally, our county and Arizona state should enforce a mandatory spay and neuter law with heavy fines to people who do not do this. I know laws take a long time to pass and are sometimes very difficult to enforce. And in the meantime, the caring employees at the shelter are working very, very hard to make sure in this really old facility that the animals get the care and attention the best possible. It's not possible to do wonders in a facility that old. Both the last and the new manager are trying to keep to a no-kill ethic for healthy and non-dangerous animals. I'm sure some of you have animals, and if they escaped your care, you were grateful to find them at the shelter safe and sound. I beg the county to speed up anything that's in the works to improve the capacity and the present buildings at this shelter. If nothing is already in the works, please, let's get this on the agenda. It's really necessary. Mojave County has a huge animal problem. Ideally, of course, a brand new shelter, larger shelter, would be the best solution. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, ma'am.
Chairman Watson,
Supervisor Bishop.
since this is the end of the call of the public, I would like to respond to Ms. Penelope Townsend.
Certainly.
Saturday night, I did attend the WAS fundraiser dinner, and I met the new manager of the shelter, and she was quite proud of the improvements that she's made just since she's been on board, and she invited me to come out and see the improvements that she's made, and she is very happy to be there, and because I'm a regular visitor at the shelter, I'm excited to go see the improvements that she spoke of. So she didn't ask for a new shelter at that time. She's busy just learning her new job and improving what she does have. But I agree with you. Whenever we get the money, let's build a new shelter. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Bishop. Anyone else wishing to respond to call to the order? Okay. That concludes call to the order. We'll now go forth to the consent agenda. The following items listed under the consent agenda will be considered as a group and acted upon by one motion with no separate discussion of said items unless a board member so requests. In that event, the item will be removed from the consent agenda for separate discussion and action. Items to be removed to Supervisor Johnson.
Nothing, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Bishop.
17, please.
Supervisor Angus.
24?
Supervisor Gould.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Number 12, number 13, number 15, number 23. And that's it.
Okay.
Chairman Watson,
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda with the exception of items 12, 13, 15, 17, 23, and 24.
Chairman Watson, I'm sorry, before you make that motion, there was also a request to pull another item.
I'm sorry, yes, there is. One more. Item number 31.
Thank you.
And item 31 for no action. Thank you, Mr. Esplin. Okay. I'll make a motion then to accept the consent agenda with the exception of 12, 13, 15, 17, 23, 24, and 31.
second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? There being none, Madam Clerk, if you'll please call roll.
Supervisor Angus? Yes. Supervisor Johnson?
Yes.
Supervisor Bishop?
Yes.
Supervisor Gould?
Yes.
Chairman Watson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. On to item number 12. Supervisor Gould.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a couple of questions on item 12.
Is your mic on?
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have some questions on agenda item 12.
Okay. Good morning. Mr. Walsh. Mr. Walsh is here to provide that information for you.
Good morning, Mr. Walsh.
Good morning.
I noticed there's a difference in some of the fees charged between the two different landfills. And I was curious the reason why there's the fee for per ton of the same items is different between the two landfills.
Chairman Watson, Supervisor Gould, if I may, I've got Colin Patillo here with me. He is the engineering manager over the environmental quality and landfill operations. If I may, I'd like to ask him if he could help me out with
Sure.
those questions. Thank you.
Well, Supervisor Gould, Chairman Watson, Supervisor Bishop, Johnson, and Supervisor Angus. As all of you know, the landfills are operated under an operations contract. Aside from each operations contractor approaching the contract from a different cost basis, the operations costs are significantly different because of the way the landfills are operating. The operational constraints at Mojave Valley Landfill in relation to certain monitoring of groundwater, gases, and installation of liner systems is different than at Surbat Landfill. Surbat Landfill, we have to have a significant engineered liner system. We monitor groundwater because there is groundwater at Surbat, there's not at Mojave Valley, and we monitor for landfill gases and other things. And essentially, that's kind of the 30,000-foot view of why those prices are different.
Thank you. I also noticed that there's quite a difference between in-state tires and
Yes.
out-of-state tires. And I'm wondering if that is because the county receives money every time somebody buys a tire. There's a tire disposal fee.
Primarily, yes. In-state tires, most of the tires you see out of the landfill are disposed of at no cost to the disposers, and that includes tire companies, the sell tires. If they are registered with us and the State Department of Revenue, and they collect the per tire fee, and that money goes back to the Department of Revenue, it's dispersed to the counties, and we allow them to dispose of tires there for free. Well, it's not free, but they don't get charged for it. Likewise, any individual person who wishes to dispose of a tire that's a county resident, they can dispose of 5 tires free per year at the landfill. So that's primarily because of the funding that the county receives from the state tire revenue.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any further questions
No, Mr. Chairman.
for number 13 also?
No, that answers 13 also.
Okay.
Chairman Watson, I just wanted to thank Mr. Patillo for correcting the Kingman Daily Miner that put some of the numbers in there incorrectly, and I understand that Hubble was going to make a correction on that, so.
Yeah, it was just an inadvertent
Yeah.
switch of numbers, but it made a significant difference in the way it looked, at least to me, and I assume the general public as well.
All right, just wanted to thank you and Hubble as well.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman Watson, I make a motion that we approve items 12 and 13.
We have a motion to approve 12 and 13. And I'll second that motion. Any further discussion? There being no further discussion, Madam Clerk, you'll call a roll call vote.
Supervisor Angus?
Yes.
Supervisor Johnson?
Yes.
Supervisor Bishop?
Yes.
Supervisor Gould?
Yes.
Chairman Watson?
Yes,
Motion carries.
thank you. On to item 15. I believe this was one of yours?
It
Is that
was.
correct? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was taking a look at this long list of participants in the SNAP Ed program, but it doesn't really describe the program.
Good
And I
point.
think that might be handy information.
Sure, absolutely. Chairman Watson, members
Good
of the
morning.
board. This is a program that provides nutrition and physical activity education and works on policy work. And more of the program actually is being directed to work on policy, local wellness policies, whether or not that's in a workplace, whether or not that's in a school. Schools are required to have local wellness policies, so we work with the schools to try to develop those, excuse me, little dry throat, to work on our policies and to address their concerns. So those have to do with food served during lunch and breakfast. This has to do with snacks that are provided and rewards that are given to children throughout the school day. And this also has to do with vending machines that are on campus.
Do they do any kind of accountability on this program to see whether this program actually makes a difference?
They do have a lot of reporting that they do to the state, to the Arizona Department of Health Services through their SEEDS program, through their SEED software. And I'm not sure, honestly, what kind of reporting they get back from that, and I'm happy to find that out for you and get back with you.
That would be outstanding.
Absolutely, will do.
And the money comes from the state, it's grant money?
Yes, it's actual federal monies that come through the state. It's pass-through funds.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Any further questions for Denise this morning? Thank you.
Thank you. You want to make the motion?
Motion to approve item 15?
Second.
We have a motion and a second for the approval of item 15. Any further discussion? There being none, Madam Clerk, roll call.
Supervisor Angus?
Yes.
Supervisor Johnson?
Yes.
Supervisor Bishop?
Yes.
Supervisor Gould?
Yes.
Chairman Watson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
On to item number 17, Supervisor Gould
I believe that was mine.
or Supervisor Bishop, okay. Thank you.
On item 17, since I'm up to be reappointed to the Mojave La Paz Local Workforce Development Board, I just wanted to state that I'd be abstaining from that vote, if that's correct, Mr. Esplin.
You can do that if you wish. Yeah. Good.
I don't think the vote will change any, so yeah, I'll just abstain from that.
Thank you.
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to continue to make Gene work on this board. Any further discussion? There being none, those, Madam Clerk?
Supervisor Angus?
Yes.
Supervisor Johnson?
Yes.
Supervisor Gould?
Yes.
Chairman Watson?
Yes,
Motion carries.
thank you.
Thank you.
Item, I believe our next item is 23, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Item 23, I believe, was pulled by Supervisor Gould, is that correct?
Yeah, it is. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ma'am, I was on the invoice for the Sheriff's Department ammo purchase. There's no quantity on the number of rounds of ammunition.
Okay.
There's units, but there's no information on how many rounds are in each unit. And I just was curious about that.
And that could be provided if you would like that information. I'm sorry, Chairman Watson, members of the board. Normally, the purchase order will be created along with the quote being attached to the purchase order that was provided from the vendor for that purchase. So if the quote didn't have the specific quantities of ammo in a box, we could always get that for you.
Okay. The other question I had is there's an order for ballistic vests.
Okay, yes.
There's 4 different types of ballistic vests. The description is identical.
Okay.
But they range in price from $1,450 to $6,550. And there's a note lower on the invoice which has the end numbers about, I would say 12 numbers are identical, and there's 3 numbers in the front that are different.
Okay. And are you looking at specifically at our purchase order, or did you look at the backup
I was looking at the invoice from the supplier,
from the supplier? Okay.
and it just didn't really, I was just curious, what does a $6,550
Vest
ballistic
versus.
vest do?
And like I said, we could get you additional information as to the differences in those vests. They do have a variety of different vests based on the different requirements and what they're being utilized for. So, and I would be happy to provide you additional information, after the meeting if
Sure,
you'd
that
like
would be outstanding.
Sure.
Thank you. I'll do it. Mr. Chairman, I move that item agenda 24 be adopted.
23.
23, I believe.
23.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? There being none, Madam Clerk.
Supervisor Angus?
Yes.
Supervisor Johnson?
Yes.
Supervisor Bishop?
Yes.
Supervisor Gould?
Yes.
Chairman Watson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
On to item number 24. Supervisor Gould, I believe?
No, I asked for it first.
Okay.
Sorry.
Supervisor
I
Angus.
can go after me. It might answer some of your questions. We've been talking about this since I think the day I took office, too, about expanding the Kingman Library. And, we've had some ups and downs with the budget from the library. So I just really thought it would be a good time to have an update about where we are, how much money we have going forward. That probably will help us in the budget time when it comes around as well.
Okay, we shall call on the library director then for that information. Good morning.
Good morning. We still have about $6.3 million in our building fund. Several months ago, when we moved forward with this project, with permission from the board, you approved $4.3 million for this project, with the caveat that we keep the other $2 million as a contingency fund. So that's where we are on the funding.
Okay. And so where are we at on the actual building? So we're going out to bid, or we've already done that?
I'm going to let our procurement director tell you about that process.
Thank you, Kathy.
Good morning again, Chairman Watson, Supervisor Angus, members of the board. We did issue the bid, I believe it was in September. No, I'm sorry, it was a bit later than that, but it was based on the approval to go out to bid for this renovation and expansion project that the board issued. And we've successfully gone through the procurement process. And so what's before you today is the award of a contract.
The award of the contract.
Correct.
And it's been long, because originally we were going to build a whole new library, pretty much in Kingman, and then we scaled it down.
Yes, originally we had hoped to remodel the current building, add on for an additional library, and to move all of administration over in the building and remove the modular building that's there. This is a scaled-down version that will end up with total of about 25,000 square feet.
Okay, and this is, again, for history's sake, this is the last library in the county that, the main libraries in each district that is being addressed, because Bullhead got a brand-new spanking sterile library, and Havasu, how many years ago did Havasu's get remodeled?
Oh, my gosh.
But it's a great library.
Yes,
And so
so-
this was the last one, and we've had building issues and things like that.
Yes.
Okay, that's all I have.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Supervisor Gould.
Ms. Pinnell, I was curious, when did libraries change from providing books to providing computers and internet service?
Oh, gosh, somewhere in the later 90s.
So is that a decision that was made by the Library Advisory Committee?
Oh, you mean here? Or I
Yes.
thought you were talking in general of all libraries across the country. I wasn't here, so I don't know exactly when that happened. Here, but I'm assuming it's about the same time that it happened.
Yeah, I would think so.
in other places.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
I have a comment. This building, our library building, is 27 years old and way overdue for an expansion. It's my understanding that the modular building that's in poor shape is being moved out, and additional parking will be part of this project. So I think Kingman's very excited to finally have their library expanded, and I'm sure our constituents and the citizens will appreciate it. And thank you for saving all that money in the building fund so that we could go forward without having to take money out of our general funds.
Thank you. I'm not sure that I can take the credit for that, but
Well,
I
you're getting
appreciate
it.
that.
Thank you, Kathy.
Take that credit when you can take it, Kathy.
Chairman, I make a motion that we approve item 24.
And I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second for the approval of item number 24. Any further discussion? There being no further discussion, Madam Clerk?
Supervisor Angus?
Yes.
Supervisor Johnson?
Yes.
Supervisor Bishop?
Yes.
Supervisor Gould?
Yes.
Chairman Watson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. On to item number 31. The Mojave County Sheriff's Office has requested that we take no action on item 31 to give them time to continue to work on a new contract and a new range of scope and range. So with that, there'll be no action on item 31. Do we need a motion?
No, but if I could give a little bit more clarification so the board can decide whether you want to take any action or not. It was actually, I was the one that asked the Sheriff's Department about this. Just a little bit of background. WECOM is currently in the process of selling off some of their assets and things. I don't know all the details and things, but I know there's a new buyer. And we have had, for many years, we've had arrangements where the Sheriff's Department and also the Public Works Department would utilize the services of WECOM, and we would pay for it on a monthly basis. It was kind of a handshake deal, just kind of go forward. But with the new buyer, we were worried that rates would change and stuff like that. And so the Sheriff's Department brought this forward to enter into a new agreement with WECOM. Well, at the same time, procurement with Public Works was trying to do the same thing. And so one contract came into my office, or it came through the sheriff, and then a couple weeks later, a different one came in. They're almost identical. And I'm thinking, what's going on? Why do we have two different things floating out there and all this stuff? And so we reached out to WECOM, and they explained, we're trying to get this done before the sale of the assets and things so that we can lock in the rate. Well, the sheriff one got on the agenda for this one, but then the Public Works wasn't going to get on until 2 weeks from now at the next agenda, and that was going to be after the deadline to make the agreement with WECOM. So essentially, we would be entering an agreement with WECOM in one, the sheriff, but then on the new buyer on the Public Works contract. So we reached out to WECOM and said, hey, what can we do here? And he suggested, well, let's see if we can just enter in a new agreement with the buyer, the person that's going to buy it. On Friday afternoon, we received confirmation from WECOM that he spoke to the new buyer. And he says, as we discussed, I spoke to the buyer. The easiest path going forward will be for us to paper these leases on the buyer's lease forms. That will get us past the deadlines milestones that I faced if the lease was going to be on the WECOM paper. Also, as we discussed, I've spoken to the new owner, and they have agreed that all leases that I do not have and need to paper to complete the sale will have the same rate they are paying now. And he attached a screenshot of the confirmation saying that they will keep the same rate. This is from the new buyer. Pursuant to our conversation, we are only looking for Paul to have the tenant leases that do not currently have a written lease or have an expired lease to be executed on the SBA form tenant lease, and for the tenant rent to be the rent that the tenant is currently paying. So basically, we're going to try to enter into a new agreement with the new buyer rather than the previous one that is currently being sold. The new buyer has said they'll keep it at the same rate. I don't know if it'll be the same terms, so there's a bit of risk there. We don't know what those terms will be, but I think it's a safe risk here to go forward, to wait on this one so we can enter into agreements with the new buyer.
On both at the next meeting?
If we can get it done by the next meeting, or maybe in January, as quickly as we can try to get it done.
Okay. So are you going to need a motion then?
No,
continue
no
that?
action. We're just recommending we're recommending to take no action.
No action?
If you wish to enter an agreement with WECOM, you can, but you only have one with the sheriff if you want to do that. But I think it makes sense to take no action and take our chances with the new buyer and see if we can lock it up at the same rate.
Chairman Watson, I'd like some clarification. So you're telling us that WECOM is selling to a new buyer?
Yes.
So all of our contracts with the TV district and everything, do we have to revisit that?
We will. We've been in discussions with them about that, and their position is that that's separate from this. So there's one contract with the sheriff, one with Public Works, and one with the TV district. And so we'll address the TV district separate from the one with the sheriff, the one with the Public Works. The one with the sheriff relates to 911 calls and relay calls, things like that. Public Works, I believe, is access to that area, and then TV district is a separate issue.
Do these decisions have to be made whether or not we're going to, fulfill the contract, go forward with a new buyer? Does that have to be made before the sales go through? I mean, is it all dependent on that? Because this is a little worrisome to me now about the TV district and, all of the agreements and the assets that, again, we've shared in the past. There seems to be a lot we're going to need to talk about.
I do. I think we need to talk about it, and I know that county administration has been diligently working on that and addressing the issue with the TV district, but it's just not ready to come back to the board yet on that issue. I was worried about that as well, because you have 3 different leases and 3 different things going on, but their position, at least the WECOM's position, is that is a separate and distinct issue, separate from the Sheriff's Department and also the Public Works. So if we take no action today, we're going to be addressing it down the road anyways.
The only reason I'm even bringing it up is because it's vaguely similar to an item we're going to be talking about later, about a transition of assets, and then are those contracts and leases valid after a company leaves? So I don't know, I think it's interesting, so I'm looking forward to hearing about it.
I was worried. We ultimately want to lock in the rate as best we can. That's what we want to do. We want to. It's a very reasonable rate. It's a great terms. WECOM has worked. At least my understanding is that they've always worked well with the county for many years, and this is a low rate, and we want to keep it. So that's why I was a little bit worried, and I wanted initially to get this forward, but we couldn't get the Public Works one in anyways, and the deadline was next week according to WECOM. So we'd lock in one, but not the other. And then there'd be a new buyer. So to me, it'd be a little bit cleaner to just work with the new buyer. And if the new buyer is saying, we'll keep the same rate, then we might as well try to do that.
I like your sense of logic on that. Thank you, Mr. Esplin. Okay. And item number 31 will be no action. Move down to public hearings, item number 35. At this time, I'll open the public hearing for number 35. Discussion, possible action, approve the adoption of Board Resolution number 2018-153, special use permit for Cecil's parcel number 317-57-021 to allow for an electric billboard in a commercial highway zone in the White Hills vicinity, north of White Hills Road, west of U.S. Highway 93 in Mojave County, Arizona. The Planning and Zoning Commission approved this with a unanimous vote. I have no one wishing to speak to item number 35, but I'll ask the audience if there's anyone in the audience wishing to speak to item number 35. Now's your opportunity. No one wishing to speak? I'll close the public hearing for item number 35.
Chairman Watson, I move we approve item 35.
We have a motion and a second for the approval of item number 35. Any further discussion? There being none, Madam Clerk.
Supervisor Angus?
Yes.
Supervisor Johnson?
Yes.
Supervisor Bishop?
Yes.
Supervisor Gould?
Yes.
Chairman Watson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Item number 36, I'll open the public hearing for the discussion, possible action, approve the adoption of Board Resolution 2018-154, amendment to the Mojave County General Plan for a general commercial land use designation to heavy industrial land use designation for assessors parcel number 324-09-011C, -012A, -013A, -015B in the Kingman vicinity, north of Sierra Vista Avenue, west of Bank Street. The Planning and Zoning Committee recommended approval by unanimous vote. Anyone wishing to speak to item number 36? Anyone wishing to speak to item 36? I've got a question for either Mr. Walsh or Ms. Ballard. Hello, Mr. Walsh.
Good morning.
My question is simply this. Will there be a block wall or any type of view obscuring fencing around this property?
Looking for the recommendations to see if that was part of the conditions, just real quick. Don't see where that was included, but Chris is going to come up here and help me out. Why don't you go ahead?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, a view obscuring wall would be required by the zoning ordinance itself, so it's actually embedded in the ordinance. So even if the board's conditions don't include one, if the ordinance requires one, they'll have to put one in. The ordinance would require one, some sort of view obscuring wall. It can be a wall, it could be also a fence with a chain link fence with the slats, or it also could be any kind of fencing that is not opaque. The property owner has the option to add a vegetative screening. In a commercial area, that vegetation would be required to be put in as mature plants. There isn't a time given for allow the plants to grow. It will depend on two things: whether or not the property can be seen from the road right away, also whether or not there's some sort of incompatibility with neighboring properties. If there are items stored on the property, then those items that are stored would have to be view obscured as well.
If I'm reading my map correctly, this runs parallel to the Wallapai Wash. Is that correct?
Oops. I'm actually looking at this one right now.
Chairman Watson, I believe it's in the area of the Kingman High School
It's real close to the high school, yes.
and
Yes.
the Mojave Wash.
Right. Mr. Watson, you're correct. It runs the northwest boundary of the property runs right along the wash.
Okay. And that brings up my question of the view obscuring fence. Now, are we going to, I'm a little unclear, is it going to be required for the property owner, or do we going to need to be putting it in for additional, for the amendment?
The ordinance says a public road right-of-way, or a public right-of-way. Yeah, it's unclear to me whether or not Mojave Wash actually qualifies as a public right-of-way.
Well, I know that there is a sidewalk, and I think there's a sidewalk that runs parallel to this.
Yeah, there's a hiking trail or a biking trail that goes along the edge of the wash.
Right.
On that side.
And I just want to make sure that people that traverse that hiking trail or sidewalk don't have to look at whatever's going to be stored.
Mr. Watson, if that's a concern of the board, the current item that you're on is the general plan. The next item would be the rezone. And my recommendation would be that whoever makes the motion on the next item include in that motion that there be a view obscuring fence along the boundary with the Mojave Wash and the hiking trail.
I knew you could get where I wanted to go. Thank you. Okay, anyone else wishing to speak to item number 36? Sir.
My name is Joe Kalis. I'm actually purchasing the property. Whether I have to put it in or not, I'm going to put it in. I wouldn't want to see that stuff myself. So basically, that along everything that I have anything fenced in will have the private fence. I've already been looking at the cost of it and everything. So
great.
All right, just I don't know, help out.
Very good. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, anyone else wishing to speak to item 36? There being none, then I'll close the public hearing for item number 36.
Chairman Watson, a motion to approve.
We have a motion
Second.
and second. Any further discussion? There being none, Madam Clerk?
Supervisor Angus?
Yes.
Supervisor Bishop?
Yes.
Supervisor Gould?
Yes.
Chairman Watson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. On to item number 37, open the public hearing for discussion, possible action. Approve the adoption of Board Resolution 2018-155 for the rezone of Assessor's Parcel Number 324-09-011C, -012A, -013A, and -0115B from general commercial 1 acre lot size zone to commercial manufacturing open lot storage to allow for a tow yard vehicle storage in the Kingman vicinity north of Sierra Vista, west of Bank. I have no one signed up to speak to item number 37, but I believe we have the owner, and he's given us our assurance of an opaque wall. Would you care to speak again, sir?
No, sir.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak to item number 37? There being none, then I'll close the public hearing for item number 37.
Chairman Watson,
Supervisor Bishop.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve item 37 as written and include a view obscuring fence along Mojave Wash.
Very good. We have a motion. Second. And second. Any further discussion? There being no further discussion, I'll close the public hearing for item 37. And entertain your motion. Supervisor Gould.
Mr. Chairman, I was wondering if Supervisor Bishop's motion just modified the proposal because she added with the view screen fence.
Mr. Asplin?
This is for 37 or 38?
For
37.
37? Do you want that to be an added condition?
Yes, the owner's already agreed to it, so unless there's a legal reason why I can't include that in my motion,
You can do that if you wish.
thank you.
Yeah.
Isn't it already a part of
Oftentimes it's in the resolution. Is it in the resolution? Do you know?
No, it's not.
It's not?
It's part of when they do it, they have.
Chairman Watson, Supervisor Johnson is somewhat correct in that typically in a site plan, and the zoning ordinance would require a view obscuring fence for certain uses. The question, as Chris pointed out, is with that being a wash there, it's not entirely clear whether that would be required at this point. So we would agree with Supervisor Bishop's recommendation to add a view obscuring fence to cover that portion abutting the wash.
And that would be permissible to do if you wish, if that's what you want to do.
And with that, we would update the resolution to include that portion.
I have a question, Mr. Chairman, of Mr. Walsh.
Certainly. Supervisor Johnson?
Will this be something that will be requiring all the other people along there to do too now?
Chairman Watson, Supervisor Johnson, it would depend a lot on the use being proposed for the properties along that wash. With this specific use, it would be a reasonable request for the board, or a reasonable requirement for the board to impose.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any further questions? Okay, we have a motion by Supervisor Bishop and a second Supervisor Angus. I properly closed the open hearing, I believe. Any further questions? There being no further questions, Madam Clerk, if you'll call roll.
Supervisor Angus?
Yes.
Supervisor Johnson?
Yes.
Supervisor Bishop?
Yes.
Supervisor Gould?
Yes.
Chairman Watson?
Yes, thank you.
Motion carries.
Thank you. On to item number 38. I'll open the public hearing for the discussion, possible action to approve the adoption of Board Resolution 2018-156 to amend the Mojave County zoning ordinance, Section 42, signed ordinance, to allow changes to be made to regulate signs by time, manner, and place. This was approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission and recommended by unanimous vote. I have no one wishing to speak to item number 38, although I will canvass the audience. Anyone wishing to speak to it can certainly come up and join in. No one wishing to speak to item number 38. I'll close the public hearing for
Chairman
Item
Watson, I'll make a
38.
motion to approve.
I want to discuss something for a second.
Okay, we have a motion, and you second, and,
No, I want to discuss it before I second it.
okay, certainly, Supervisor.
Yeah, Mr. Espel and I actually spoke about this during the election season because we were seeing signs going up before the designated period that you allow. So we had a little bit of an argument because you used this Reed versus Town of Gilbert to include political signs, saying that you can't stop someone's freedom. So is that being addressed in this? Is the political signs, is this the reason for this now?
No, my understanding, this is not the reason for this particular one. Reed came through, and Reed addresses whether you can zone the content of signs. And what happened was jurisdictions all over the United States were really restricting the content and saying, hey, based on the content, you cannot do this, you cannot do this, you cannot do this. And Reed said, look, we need to get out of the business of restricting the content. You can restrict based on time, manner, means, and place, but not the content. And so this is, I believe, an update to our own ordinances to make sure we're in line with Reed. But it's not addressing the political signs per se. I don't think this is going to address political signs at all. And I'm getting a nod in the negative from Christine. But this is not the purpose for that.
Okay, well, I think we do need to clarify that for future because that was a very mushy time here in the county because signs were going up and before the designated period, and then I was told that they can because we can't regulate the content of signs, and so I think we need some clarification, so I'll make sure it's on some future.
Absolutely, and I think we can still regulate the political signs. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we cannot. It's just that,
Timing, it's just the time period that they can go up.
yeah, it'll be tricky. In fact, another attorney in my office, Bob Taylor, and I discussed it. He handles these zoning issues. And I think there is a way to do it, though. Okay. And certainly now that the election's over, we'll have a good amount of time to be able to make sure we get it right, and we won't have it rushed or anything before the next election. So we'll look into it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Gould.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Esplin, I believe Reed versus Gilbert was when the city of or the township of Gilbert attempted to regulate a church's sign.
That's correct.
That they, since that's a First Amendment issue.
It is. It was
regulating a First Amendment issue.
It is. You're exactly right. And really, when it came down, it surprised a lot of people, a lot of jurisdictions. And it really has, it's not just addressing regulation of a church, it addresses all kinds of issues of political signs and advertising and various things. And so it's a lot of jurisdictions are making changes from that, based on that opinion.
I also think you'd have an extremely hard time regulating a political sign on private property.
Yes.
As that is a First Amendment issue also. I guarantee I can find a lot of groups like Goldwater Institute and various groups like that that would be willing to defend my use of a political sign on my own property. So we may not really want to go there.
Just for clarification, we weren't discussing private property. We were discussing public, our land and things that were going up like months before the election. Just wanted to know if we had anything, because different jurisdictions do different things. I know that Bullhead City has their own, and I just wanted clarification. And then this lawsuit came up, and it kind of muddied the water. So I think we still need to talk about what we want to do. And if we want to just open it up all year long to, political signs. I'm not talking about statement signs. I'm talking about election signs. And but I think that's something that this board needs to talk about.
No, that's correct. I mean, that's for the board's pleasure, what you wish to discuss. That's certainly room for debate. It's a First Amendment issue. That was really the key, is First Amendment issues. And if we do craft one, we'll certainly have to make sure that we are on the side of protecting the First Amendment rights of the citizens. So, yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I heard no delineation between campaign signs and political signs, and no delineation between public property and private property in the discussion here today. All I have to go on is the discussion here today.
Sure.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just to make sure, Mr. Walsh, on this changes, basically the changes that we're looking at today have to do with signs that we're permitting, correct?
Chairman Watson, Supervisor Johnson, that's correct. Basically, what we've done is based on Reed versus Gilbert, as has been discussed, we went back through our ordinance on the signs that we permit to make sure that our ordinance is not overly restrictive and not in violation of Reed versus Gilbert. Now, there are some signs that are allowed that we don't permit. So, and that would basically that is somewhat addressed in here as well. That we will not be regulating those signs. But this ordinance here is for the signs that we regulate and that we would permit.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any further questions? Okay, we have a motion. We're waiting a second, I believe. Is that correct? In that case, I'll second the motion for item number 38. Any further discussion? There being no further discussion, Madam Clerk?
Supervisor Angus?
Yes.
Supervisor Johnson?
Yes.
Supervisor Bishop?
Yes.
Supervisor Gould?
Yes.
Chairman Watson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. On to item number 39. I'll open the public hearing for the discussion, possible action regarding the approval of the adoption of Board of Supervisors Resolution 2018-157, Mojave County Ordinance number 2018-06, an ordinance setting forth amendment to the Mojave County Ordinance 2018-04, which adopted the Mojave County Building Codes to clarify reporting responsibilities within this ordinance and other clarifications. The Commission recommended approval by unanimous vote. On item 39, I have one person wishing to speak. So, in the interest of the open public hearing, Mr. Boone.
Michael Boone, 2210 Palo Verde North, Lake Havasu City. I was present at this meeting with the advisory board when they discussed this, and I mentioned to them Article 5 of their bylaws, they do not have the jurisdiction to do things like this, to change administrative codes. That's the Board of Supervisors, or even make recommendations. Furthermore, I believe it's going to become problematic, speaking to the experts in the field, that when you take a bureaucrat and give him the authority to override somebody that has a license, credentials, and the due authority through the building code to override their decisions, override their inspections, I think it becomes problematic for the county liability-wise. They saw that in Las Vegas many years ago with the piping, when they used hose for piping instead of hard pipe. So if a bureaucrat's going to be able to override through the chain of command a credentialed, licensed building inspector or inspectors, then that person should be required to have those same credentials. So you're comparing, it'd be like a paramedic trying to do brain surgery. You're telling the paramedic to do the brain surgery when you have a brain surgeon already on staff. So the ordinance should probably not be addressed at this time. It should go back and be changed, that as long as in the organizational chart, the person that's making that decision has the same credentials, the same levels of training, then they can override a building inspector. But it's made look like it's clarifying the organizational chart, but I think if you dig deeper, there's a different intent there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Boone. Anyone else wishing to speak to item number 39 before I close the public hearing? Anyone else wishing to speak to item number 39? There being none, I'll close the public hearing for item number 39.
Chairman Watson, motion to approve.
Thank you, Supervisor Bishop. We have a motion
Second.
and a second. Any further discussion? There being no further discussion, Madam Clerk.
Supervisor Angus?
Yes.
Supervisor Johnson?
No.
Supervisor Bishop?
Yes.
Supervisor Gould?
No.
Chairman Watson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Okay, we've already done all the public hearings. We're on to the regular agenda. Our original number 40 was struck by the county attorney. We're on to item number 41. Discussion, possible action, the election of the chairman and vice chairman of the Mojave County Board of Supervisors to be effective January 1, 2019 for calendar year 2019.
Chairman Watson,
Supervisor Bishop.
I'd like to make a motion that we elect our vice chair, Hildy Angus, as our chairman for the year 2019.
And I'll second that motion. We have a motion and a second for Supervisor Angus to be the chairman for 2019, effective January 1 through December 31 of 2019.
Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Gould.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once upon a time, I heard about an agreement that was made to rotate chairmanship rather than majority rules. So I'm just curious, if that was the agreement, it seems like we're out of rotation.
Supervisor Angus.
I don't remember ever formally saying, I mean, I think that, in the past, I know there were like, how many years, Supervisor Johnson, were you chairman? Like 3 years back in the day? I mean, it was something that we talked about when we first got in, but things changed, people left, people died, and so this is the way we've been doing it. It was my turn last time, but because of the things that we were going through with the water, we felt for continuity's sake, it was probably better to keep the chairman who everybody knew in Phoenix and who was negotiating for us. So I stepped aside last year. So that's where we are.
Thank you, Supervisor Angus, for the
I got a
clarification.
question for Mr. Esplin.
Certainly.
Mr. Esplin, is there any requirement in state statute of how Board of Supervisors chooses its chairman?
Not to my knowledge.
Thank you.
Actually, I'm sorry. I'd have to look real quick, but I think it's just based on what the board wishes to do. I don't think there's anything in the statute that says that it has to be in rotation or by agreement or anything like that. I think it's just up to the board to make that decision. I'll look real quick while you're discussing the matter, but I believe that's what it is.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Johnson.
I believe what Supervisor Gould has been referring to is when 6 years ago, when the new board took office, they decided that was the discussion, was to rotate it among districts. The clerk can probably correct me if I'm wrong.
As I recall from 6 years ago, the discussion was for the rotation of the 3 new board members. Wasn't that correct? Do you recall, Supervisor Angus?
Well, we nominated you, and then I was the vice chair, and we were rotating, but then Supervisor Brotherton passed away, and, changed, and then, I'm just going to say it, we had a normal rotation, it would have been Buster Johnson, but because the board gets to make these decisions, it died for lack of a second. And that's when you came in 2 years ago, and we kept you on last year. But as far as I know, as far as I've been told, as far as I've been advised, that is at the sole discretion of the board.
Right.
And to answer Supervisor Gould's question, 11-216, the supervisor shall elect a chairman who, in addition to his other duties, shall sign all orders and warrants of the board. That's really the only direction that state statute has on it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Supervisor Gould, any further discussion?
No.
No? Supervisor Johnson? Pardon? Any further discussion? No. Okay. There being no further discussion, Madam Clerk?
Supervisor Angus?
Yes.
Supervisor Johnson?
Yes.
Supervisor Bishop?
Yes.
Supervisor Gould?
Yes.
Chairman Watson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Chairman Watson, I'd like to nominate Supervisor Bishop as the vice chair.
We have a motion, and I'll second that motion. Any discussion? There being no further discussion, Madam Clerk?
Supervisor Angus?
Yes.
Supervisor Johnson?
Yes.
Supervisor Bishop?
Yes. Thank you.
Supervisor Gould?
Yes.
Chairman Watson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And congratulations, Supervisor Angus.
Thank you
Chairman
very much, everybody. Thank you.
Chairman and Vice Chairman Bishop
Thank you.
for 2019. It will be my pleasure to hand you the gavel. Okay, on to item number 42. Discussion, possible action, authorize staff to appoint an experienced appraiser to determine the rental valuation of the county-owned property, assessors parcel number 225-26-109, which is located within Mojave Valley Irrigation Drainage District in Mojave County, Arizona, for the purpose of extending the existing lease by and between Wakamoto Farms and Mojave County, which expires January 31st, 2019, for an additional one-year term subject to the right of renewal. Mr. Hendrick.
Mr. Chairman, I originally, on this piece of property, I originally had to extend the lease for Wakamoto Farms until January 31st, 2019. It came to my attention that that was not an appropriate action to ask the board to consider. This lease actually expires, and I misstated that. This lease expires January 31st, 2019. I asked the board to extend that for an additional year. Came to my attention that this was an inappropriate action that was against state statute that I was going to be asking the board to contemplate. What I understood came into play is 11-256, which specifically addresses when the Board of Supervisors and a county purchases property that's currently under lease, it requires that the lease be valued by a competent appraiser to establish that lease's value. It does not require that the county go out for public auction for that lease. However, we shall accept at least 90% of that appraised value and not more than 100% of the appraised lease value. So I met with Jenny, and she appropriately recommended that we change the language because of the conflict in state law to ask the board to allow us to go out for a appraisal and try to get that done as expeditiously as possible due to the lease expiring in January. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Hendricks. I believe the current lease is it $60 an acre per year
Yes, sir. It is $60 an acre per year.
on 15 acres?
Yes.
Thank you. Just for the clarification. Was a good catch. I didn't realize that property that we leased had to be appraised also, so thank you. Good catch.
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Johnson?
Probably for Mr. Esplin. Didn't the board come back and purchase additional water allotment for Wakamoto Farms so they could farm this land?
I don't recall the specifics. I know we talked about that, and I think they did. I can't remember, though.
Do you want me to field that?
Can Mike
Sure,
fill that?
sure.
I know that we talked about that. I just don't know the details of it. I don't want to mislead you.
When we purchased this property, it was being farmed under a joint farm lease agreement, and the term consortium has been thrown out there. A consortium was actually formed back, I think, in 2007 by Wayne McKellop, so that people could actually continue to farm these small groups of parcels. I think there was at least 5 people in the consortium that owned various sizes. And our farm was actually being farmed by joint use of the water because the parcel that we purchased didn't have the needed 6 acre feet or the needed amount of acre feet per acre to farm alfalfa. And so what I had asked the board to do subsequent to us purchasing the property is to request from the MVIDD additional water allocations so that we could bring our water allocation up to the full amount required to farm asbestos.
Alfalfa.
I'm sorry, alfalfa. I also want to mention, very quickly, we did receive a letter subsequent to our interactions with Mojave Valley Irrigation and Drainage District that they were going to disallow a consortium to farm our property and the rest of those people's properties. And we're looking into the legality of that right now, currently. And we're also looking into, we believe that property has some present perfected rights, which is the highest water priority for the Colorado River along that river area for any water. So we believe that's could be in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 acre feet per acre.
Thank you, Mr. Hendricks. Supervisor Johnson.
Mr. Chairman, I realize it's not much water that we have there, but wouldn't it be something to look at into the fallowing program? Should that be brought back to us at the same time when for a lease?
I would imagine it would having to do with the consortium.
Because I'm not sure how the
This property is mixed with a consortium of other properties, and generally in a fallowing program, there'll be a portion of large parcels together. So our 15 acres would probably, if we decided to do so, would be enjoined by other properties. So it's a little complex in this case.
And Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Johnson, on the fallowing concept for MVIDD, that discussion is currently involved down in the state regarding the drought contingency plan. And different property owners, different farmers are talking about potentially fallowing their property and utilizing it as either system conservation water or intentionally created surplus. System conservation water stays behind the dam and supports Lake Mead water elevation. Intentionally created surplus actually can be moved. That's the way I understand it. And Mojave Valley Irrigation and Drainage District is engaged in those types of discussions to be included in being allowed to do that. So we wouldn't necessarily go down individually as a property owner and try to accomplish being included in a fallowing program. Obviously, from a board perspective, understanding what the board has talked about in the past, the board would support system conservation water that would stay behind the dam and not be transferred down to central Arizona. But that total discussion is being made by Mojave Valley Drainage and Irrigation and Drainage District. And if they achieve to where they're included in the drought contingency plan and allowed to fallow and get paid for their water, then we would, I would assume, have that opportunity unless they limited that ability to acreage or some other thing that would take us out of the mix, out of the equation.
That follow-up question, I guess I'm a little confused now on, we bought the property, it was being farmed under a consortium. Now we're doing a lease with Wakamoto Farms. Will it just be Wakamoto Farms that is in the lease?
And I didn't explain that correctly. We are the consortium. The consortium's property was being farmed by Wakamoto Farm, at least, I believe, since 2007. And when it was McKellep's property, it was farmed, I believe, in the 90s, way back in since 96 or some date. Wakamoto Farms has been farming the property that we purchased for an extended period of time when it was under McKellep's ownership and later when he sold off and under the consortium's ownership.
Are you saying we're part of the consortium?
Is
that what you just said?
And the joint farm lease agreement, and this might shed a little light on the consortium. It's not a secret society. It's just a group of farmers that are included on a joint farm lease agreement. And they probably did that for expediency. They also did it so that these little individual farmers wouldn't lose their water allocation. The land had to continuously be farmed or we weren't eligible for water allocation. So this group got together prior to us purchasing the property, and they were signatories on the lease to Wakamoto's farms, so that there were 5 signatories that actually signed that joint farm lease agreement. And now the lease agreement that's currently being contemplated, one of the farms dropped out, one of the farms that we're somewhat in disagreement with, WPI, that has pushed towards being able to sell the water that they're currently leasing. So now there are 4 that are in this joint farm lease agreement that, as far as I'm aware, all are interested in signing and all are interested in allowing Wakamoto Farms to farm the property. And the important issue is we've got to continue to farm this property or we lose the water that we have and we lose standing.
Chairman Watson, can I ask a couple of questions? And my questions are about the purchase itself. So when we went and we made our deal through the real estate agent with the owner, the lease part was part of that agreement, correct?
That's
the number, everything was part of that sale. So now that we have to go out to bid, which, I don't understand why we didn't know that before, but now that we have to go to bid, are we open to any liability? I mean, anyone now can come in, right? And so this consortium that we are or may not be part of, they might not be the high bidder.
Okay, we are the consortium. The consortium is the property owners. And we don't go out to bid. What we have to do is get 90% of the appraised value for the lease. And this specific statute, 11256, because we purchased the property with an existing farm lease on it, it doesn't require us to go out to auction or to bid for that lease.
Okay. And we didn't know that, honestly. And that's, again, I just want to go back a little. That was, my concern with the WECOM thing. It's kind of almost like the same issue about buying and selling, but we are under a whole different set of statutes when we go and buy things. And I just don't understand how that could have been missed, honestly.
I guess if I can finish up on mine, because you said it again, Mike, that we are the consortium. I'm guessing, this is, let's say, a section of land, 640 acres, and we have our little piece in the middle, and this consortium, which hopefully we're not part of, but these group of farmers get together and they say, we're taking that whole section of land and we're going to do alfalfa because it doesn't make sense to have 2 acres in the middle that's potatoes or something. But now we bought the land is going to be leased, the way you're explaining it, to a consortium, but to have Wakamoto farm it seems like we've got a lot of steps in there where we should just be able to say, hey, we got a lease with Wakamoto. You can jump in, Gary.
I believe I can clarify that for you. Wakamoto has a lease with the consortium, and that's basically it. What was your other question?
Are we part of the consortium?
Our piece of property is in the consortium area, correct, Mr. Hendricks?
We are. There was 5 of us.
There's 4.
Now there's 4. We can either choose to participate or choose not to. I would caution the board if we choose not to participate, which isn't binding except that Wakamoto Farms gets to farm all the properties together. If we don't farm that property or have somebody farm it, we stand to lose. Our ability, our water.
Right.
So it is important for us, I believe, at least in my opinion, to continue to farm that property. And the county doesn't farm. So we would either be leasing to, Wakamoto or somebody else who would farm that property.
That's correct.
Okay, I guess my question is that the part that's throwing me off is we're part of a consortium. I don't recall us ever joining that or going to a meeting or paying dues or agreeing to whatever they're doing. Not that I'm against what's going on, it's just, It seems like all of a sudden now we're part of a group and I never knew we were part of this group.
And Mr. Chairman, I can address that a little bit. When we purchased this property, it had a joint farm lease agreement included. Let's say we purchased this property early in April. There was some discussion, probably April 4th, there was some discussion that went back and forth about the joint farm lease agreement with you and Yvonne. And you discussed it, and you were concerned about liability.
Yeah.
On April 9th, we sent out, the board approved me to negotiate and to make sure all the paperwork was together and then to execute the agreement. On April 9th, the final purchase agreement was sent out to all the Board of Supervisors, and on that purchase agreement, it listed a joint farm lease agreement. I signed the agreement on April 10th. In looking at it, there was some concern, and I think you realized on April 4th that we were required to keep that joint farm lease agreement in force until January 31st, 2019. It didn't expire with the purchase of the property. It would expire on January 31st, 2019. So by the purchase of the property, we didn't have to do anything. That lease was perpetuated. It never terminated at the purchase. It stayed in effect until its termination date. So we were locked in. What I'm asking the board to do is to comply with state law, get it appraised. If you want to lease the property, fine. If you want to stay in the group that is allowing their farms to be farmed, that's fine. If you don't, we'll try to make other arrangements. The first thing that we have to do regardless, I believe, is to get that property appraised, the lease appraised, and then you can make a business decision on how you decide to move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Hendricks. Supervisor Gould.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Esplin, are we allowed as a county to join a consortium?
I don't understand the consortium part of it. I wouldn't use that term. I don't know what that, I think what we're
We
trying to
could
get
call
at
it
is
a
this.
partnership, and I'm not sure we're allowed to be in partnership.
I don't think it's a partnership that we have. What we have is we purchased a piece of property, and on that property was a lease, and that lease has Wakimoto Farms farming the property. That lease already existed, as Manager Hendricks explained, that already existed. There are other farmers that are also farming with them under that lease. That's the lease. That's the lease they have. It's a joint lease. 5 people have signed, said, yep, you can farm, you can farm, you can farm, you can farm, you can farm. That's what we're talking about. Whether it's a term of consortium or not, I don't know. It's not a partnership. It's not a consortium. It's a lease agreement. We would be entering into a lease agreement with Wakimoto Farms to allow him to continue to lease, continue to farm the property if that's what he wished to do.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Esplin, does this lease say that we're also going to be farming our Mojave County's land with the Jones Farm and the Smith Farm and the Johnson Farm?
I'd have to look at what the original terms of the...
That would be my question, is can we be involved in that kind of a partnership?
I don't see that as a partnership. I don't see anything that in the law that would prohibit something like that. Because what we're doing is we're saying, on our piece, on our property, you're allowed to farm that land. That's what we're saying. And he, as a business perspective, he wants to be able to farm the entire thing. I mean, he doesn't want to. It's a huge parcel. How many acres is it? 160? More than that?
Something like that. I'm not sure. I'm
No,
not sure.
I understand. I understand all of that. My question is, has the legislature given the county the authority to enter into an agreement such as that? Because to me, it sounds like it's more than just a lease between the Mojave County and that farmer. It sounds like it's a joint agreement with other farmers, that this group of farmers have come together and we're going to allow this piece of land to be farmed as one.
Let me help you a little bit, if I can.
Sure.
The group of farmers got together on these less than 200 acres. There was 5 owners. The agreement then went to Mojave Valley Irrigation and Drainage District to get that water to these parcels. That's if you want to call it a consortium, it's the agreement of those 5 farmers to go to MVIDD to get the water. I believe I'm correct on that. In order for us to sustain our current farming adventure, the only thing that we needed to do was to provide information on the appraisal value per month of each one of our 15 acres in order to keep the continuity of the farm and thereby not losing our enforced water. If we were to lose either one, the continuity of farming or the enforcement or the ability to get water, then we would lose standing for the property that we purchased to do just precisely that. I'm hoping I clarified.
I am not confused on that.
Okay.
Back again, has the legislature given us the authority to enter into some, you guys don't want to call it a partnership agreement, a joint lease with other people? I don't know that we have that authority. We only have the authority that has been given to us by the state legislature.
That is correct.
And when you enter into public-private partnerships, there's things that regulate those.
That's correct.
And my concern is, are we allowed to do that? I'm assuming this land has a common well also. And that's how the water gets to that property. Because I doubt that our 15-acre parcel has its own well.
You're correct.
So somebody needs to take a look at this. One of us here is an attorney, and I am not, but somebody needs to take a look at the legality of that deal. I understand all the other things. I understand that if we don't farm it, that we're going to lose those water rights and you're going to lose standing. But that doesn't mean that if it's illegal that we can continue to do it. And my question is the legality of that agreement with the joint leaseors.
Mr. Chairman, may I make a suggestion for board consideration? Obviously, Supervisor Gould raised some questions that need to be answered, and so did Supervisor Johnson. Currently, before the board is to have the property appraised. Regardless of whether we lease individually or enter into a joint lease agreement, that property needs to be appraised. And I don't think we're going to be farming ourselves. So the only way that I see a path forward is to try to get somebody else to agree to farm that property for us for a price, 90% of the appraised value. So quite possibly, the board could act upon the item that's before them, and then before we bring back any agreement to the board for a business decision, our attorney Ryan can look into it and provide the answers that you all are requesting.
Thank you, Mr. Hendricks. As I recall, in reading the Arizona revised statutes from a number of years ago, that each county in Arizona is allowed to actually have a farm. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but it came from the early statehood days in which counties were the provider for indigent and the poverty and those things, and employed the jail residents' employment opportunities. So, but I do know that in the Arizona revised statute that we do have the ability to have a farm for Mojave County.
Chairman Watson?
That's true.
You just reminded me, back under the leadership of Sheriff Joe Cook, we did have the Mojave County Honor Farm out at the Kingman Airport, and they did farm produce and things, and we had the authority back then. So unless the legislation has changed since then.
Well, hopefully we'll find out if consortium will work in that. How's that?
I think
Personally, I don't want to be a farmer.
Sure, Watson. I think that there's two different issues that we're talking about, and it brings up like a wider issue for me that seems to have come to our attention more and more. And when our agenda items and our action items come, it's signed off by the attorney's office. What does that really mean? I mean, I'm asking you, do you do all this stuff? Do you make sure that this is all legal through the statutes? I mean, how deep down before you sign off do you go?
That's a great question. And I don't know the answer. I have an answer, but it's uncertain. Honestly, when I jumped into this position, I don't know. What I try to do is this. I try to look at this, one, to make sure that it complies with the open meeting laws. That's what I'm trying to do that. But two, I'm also trying to determine if it's legal or not. I try my best, but unfortunately, I can't anticipate every question that we have. I think, admittedly, the one that Supervisor Gould is asking here is one I didn't think about. I thought about some other ones, but the question that he's asking today, I had not thought about that particular one about a private-public partnership. I hadn't, and I try to anticipate as best I can. But certainly, you guys know that I'm limited to just the knowledge that I have, and I try to do the best that I can. But I try to sign off on one that is open meeting law, two, that this is as legal as best as I can describe it.
Okay,
is what I try to do. What my predecessor or anybody else or other that signs off on it, I don't know.
So you're going to find out the answer, because I'm
I'd be happy
curious
to. I'd be
as
tried to. Absolutely, if that's what the board wishes me to do.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I don't want to get off subject, but pertaining to the question that Supervisor Angus just brought up, it's a bigger problem than that. I think we've gotten away from agenda items are supposed to be routed through the manager, the attorney, finance, all these people prior to being given to the clerk. And I think the time is not being allotted. All these people are being put on the spot on Wednesday at noon or whatever time our agenda items are done, which doesn't really give them much time to have it, and that's why we're getting late ads and additional information, and that's probably a different agenda item that needs to be addressed by the board, because it's hard for them to go through, what do we have today, 60-some items, and read them all and do all the backup.
Thank you, Supervisor Johnson. Supervisor Gould, did you have a comment or question?
I'll chime in.
Well, I thought you wanted to, but
I'm not picking on the attorney. There's in a multitude of opinions, there's wisdom, and that's why we're a board of multiple peoples. Because rather than having one person as a dictator, that because people bring their life experiences and their different points of view together, as we have these discussions, we're going to come up with stuff that we didn't think of And I didn't think of this earlier. I would have brought it up before the meeting.
Certainly.
Yeah, they come up as they go through, and our life experiences is what we bring to the table. Thank you.
Exactly. Thank you.
Chairman, I think the clerk had something. Oh, no more?
I think the clerk probably wants to take a break. No? We're good?
Chairman, if I could just tie up one last loose end. The original question that Supervisor Johnson had on the issue looks like on April 16th, we brought before the board, authorized staff to submit the application for the agricultural water entitlement and the associated fees to the Mojave Valley Irrigation and Drainage District to be funded from general fund contingency. So we did that on April 16th, 2018. I don't know how much was paid though. So just to answer your original first question that you asked me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Esplin. I do have one person signed up to speak to item number 42. Mr. Boone.
Michael Boone, 2210 Palo Verde North, Lake Havasu City. You pretty much answered all the questions I had. But one thing I want to know is when you took over this property and purchased it, did you at that time do a survey to find out what the current rates were? Or did you just accept what was on the contract and now you're getting ready to go into another contract, you're looking at what the rates really should be? And maybe in the future, anything you do like this, you should be looking at, before you put your pen to the paper, what are the current rates to see if there's people out there that can do it in a more cost-effective way to the county. Now, obviously, this is a tough call because you've got somebody farming land that comes congruent to that. And it would make it hard to go out to bid on that. And it'd be in kind of insanity to do that, the cost that you'd lose. But from what I've seen in the 2 years I've been here, that there's an awful lot of ink going on paper, signing stuff, and then meetings later, something like this comes up where there was no evaluation on what you really should be getting in remuneration back for what you're putting out. And I agree with Ms. Angus that I read these things, and I've been caught up here myself with documents missing that should have been in, that was in one person's personnel packet that had all these documents, and another personnel packet had different documents. So I'm in agreement with what's going on. I just think that before you put the pen to the paper, you should run the value of something and find out if the county is getting its full value, not come back at it now and say, oops, we violated the law, or we didn't follow the law. So again, these things keep coming up over and over again, and Ms. Angus is correct in her concern as well as Mr. Gould. You're getting caught off guard and having to make decisions being caught off guard. Thank you.
Mr. Boone, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Did you just indicate to me that you had files of our employees?
Every time that you put out an agenda and you're hiring a manager or you're hiring or promoting somebody, there's a packet put together. Maybe your memory doesn't serve you right, but when the Proudfoot issue came up, I brought up that the stuff that was submitted for her promotion was inconsistent with stuff that was put for other promotions, such as her schooling and her resume. So that's what I was addressing.
Okay, I just wanted a clarification.
Only documents I have are what's given to me.
Thank you. Okay, we're still on item number 42. The issue is the appraisal.
May I say one more thing? You know, we keep talking about the county making more money. There's a distinct possibility we'll get less. Now that it's going back out, you know, we could be getting less than what we negotiated, right?
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Angus, that's a possibility, or you know, it could be that Wakamoto Farms might not want to farm it, and then we'll have to go find another somebody to service
I just think it's
the land.
interesting, that's all. I mean, there was no other point, then I just thought it was interesting.
It's either going to be 60 or it'll be more or less. It's more or less than 60.
Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Gould.
The real point is the cost of the appraisal will be more than whatever Farmer Wakamoto will pay us to farm that land.
For 1 year.
And Supervisor, Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Gould, that's correct. The appraisal right now, at least when we've tested the waters, is going to be over probably $3,500.
Chairman Watson.
Supervisor,
I'd like to make I'd like to make a motion that we approve item 42.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second for the approval of item 42. Any further discussion? There being none, Madam Clerk?
Supervisor Angus?
Yes.
Supervisor Johnson?
Yes.
Supervisor Bishop?
Yes.
Supervisor Gould?
Yes.
Chairman Watson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Chairman Watson, can we take a 5-minute break, please?
Certainly. Let's make it a 10-minute break. Back in the saddle, ladies and gentlemen.
What do I do with them?
Okay, I believe we're on item number 45. 44. Discussion, possible action, concerns over our election process and our e-poll book vendor. This is brought to us by Supervisor Johnson. Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I tried to explain it in the backup material so we don't take too much time. My biggest concern is that the system didn't work and that nobody was here to fix it correctly. And I think taxpayers are tired of government getting ripped off by contractors and government doing nothing about it. And that's why I brought it forward to the board to find out if it was the fault of the contractor who did this, because it did stop our recorder's office for about 24 hours. And, you know, God bless them, they made it without missing a beat, but if something would have happened, you know, right away, we always think the worst, you know. So that's why I brought it forward to the board to see if it's something that we just need to hold people accountable if they're selling us something or not doing what we're paying them to do.
Have a question for Mr. Timber?
I think I had it all in the backup. I'd probably be more, because I asked him so I could put stuff in, so it'd be up to the board to see what they want to do.
Question for Mr. Temper? None? Supervisor Bishop?
Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor
Thank you,
Gould.
Mr. Chairman. Alan, so what happened?
Very straightforward. Thank you, Supervisor Gould. Chairman Watson, other board members. All right, what happened? I'm
3
going to
minutes
try
or
to.
less.
Excuse me?
3 minutes or less.
I got it. Really, you know me now, don't you? Okay. Basically, the backup was really, really good. Okay, there, you know, a couple little things in there, you know, I think wasn't totally accurate. But I need to say this. There has never been or never will be a perfect election. That's the starting point. It's just such a dynamic of things moving and going constantly, and it's been going 6 straight months that way. Okay, that's to be understood. So a lot of times you're just trying to cut this and move here and move there and make things happen. But to be more direct was this. We're working with a vendor named Robus Inc., which is our electronic poll book vendor. We signed on with them in 2015, start 2016, held 4 elections with them. I had an absolutely wonderful project manager who made sure everything happened. Another thing that I had learned over the years of doing elections, and I think we just learn from life, is never trust anybody, regardless. But you still have to have trust to a point, or you're just going to micromanage and put yourself into a hole. I had a project manager that worked through 2016, was phenomenal. He was a vice president of this company, trying to show us, and they still are a super responsive company in general. Let's just put it that way. He made everything work out. He leaves 2018 come around, and it worked out for us on the primary election that we didn't have data transfer issues, or if we did have them, but they were all worked out in advance. What happened here was this. That gentleman was no longer around. The data guy left just before this coming election. And we have electronic poll books, which you checked in at the, people vote at the polling places, and we had 21,000 people plus voted the polls this time. 51,000 early ballots, 21,000 approximately voted the polls. That information needs to be downloaded from the electronic poll book system so the recorder's office can proceed. They can proceed by processing early ballots and provisional ballots afterwards. Now, historically, as in 2016, that process was taken care of the next day on Wednesday. So the recorder's office by noon was up and running. We'll call it that way. Wednesday, they were up and running. The transfers had happened. Well, it didn't happen this election. It happened in the primary election, to the best of my knowledge, but it didn't happen in the general election. Now, the vendor, I got to give all the credit in the world to Recorder Blair, which I know is right over there. She's 10, 11 o'clock at night, that night before, working back and forth with the vendor saying, well, this isn't working. Because if there's as much as one little mistake from a data field, and I'm not a techie guy when it comes to, basically, I'm not a techie guy, okay? But the data transfers just didn't, all you needed was one little field to be off and something wasn't working correctly, all right? So they were pasting between the gentleman from this company, Robus, and Recorder Blair to make it work out. Well, we lost a day and a half's worth of production, is basically what it comes down to it, okay? And the recorder's office knocked out 8,000 early ballots in a day, you know, come after Thursday afternoon going into Friday, okay? I mean, it was just blew my mind because I was starting to count about everything in come the weekend for early ballots, all right? So lessons learned is if somebody has to be accountable for something, it's me. I'm to have the ownership of the system, okay? Lessons to be learned, I'm not going to trust anybody, because I still don't in life, you know, on things without me just going nuts over certain things. But I do have plans with this vendor already worked out. Recorder Blair and I already had a meeting set a month and a half ago with this company with the new voter registration system, which is coming across 13 of the 15 counties in 2019, starting 2020. We had a date set already for January 15th to discuss all data needs for this new voter registration system that it's still being developed, okay? So we're being as proactive as we can, and this happened even prior to this, okay? It's unfortunate. I'm sorry that it happened, and we lost a day and a half if you really want to look at it, you know? And it's all I can say. I'm sorry. So, did that help you?
I guess, so what you're saying is it's not the vendor, it's because we didn't run tests on our equipment to make sure it was up and running before the election?
No, I'm saying okay. I think it's the vendor, and yes, I should have had some tests in place, which I haven't. I didn't have tests in places prior to this. I had in mind going into this election because there's lots of data loads that happened prior to this. A lot of things I've done with this vendor for 2 months leading into this election, changing logic for the election, just things in general. They became my main point of focus for the last almost month of the election working with this vendor. Now the recorder's office has uploads. They could be weekly, every bi-weekly. For when early ballots happen, and it's similar, but it's not exactly the same as this the next day after the election load that we're talking about, with the people that actually voted at the polls. Nope, I didn't have anything, any tests set out, which, okay, now I know I should have. I should have made sure because I trusted. And I expected it to be there, and I expected it to happen, and it didn't. The vendor was a good vendor. They're still a good vendor. I would stand behind them. They've worked with our IT department on many issues leading into making sure that our poll books can talk across this whole country when they had software upgrades and this upgrades and that upgrades, and everything was going, nothing's going without a hitch because you had to work it here and work it there, and things happen. But bottom line is this. I'm assuming I could have known that from doing some testing, but I didn't. And that's it.
Then, okay, I understand if we didn't test it, that's our fault. But then do we have someone who was assigned to us, which I would think since we only have an election every 2 years, that we can call immediately instead of making the recorders sit around? I mean, because I'm surprised you didn't have a heart attack waiting a day and a half to be able to do the election. Is that part of the contract that they have staff on the phone or some way to walk us through any kind of problems that we?
And they do, and they did. And yeah, it failed, but they do and they did. We were on the phone starting the next day. It was mainly Recorder Blair, but we were on the phone with vice presidents of the company, the data guy, the new data guy. The new data guy is the gentleman that we had to deal with to get these fields to work out correctly. We were not ignored. I mean, basically, I went in on Thursday morning, And after being Christy working many hours and late into the night, I went in, basically, we got on the phone, I said, it's ending now. You're doing it now. Make it work now. Well, basically what came down, it wasn't, I didn't scare them. They came to the right point right after that. They had the things worked out correctly at that time, and Recorder Blair had her information by late that morning that it worked out and she was able to progress ahead. So
But didn't they give us the wrong guy first, or somebody that didn't know the machine, and then we had to go to a second person?
No. The gentleman I had in the office, I had office support the day before, which he's not the data guy who was in my office the day before, and he was working through issues throughout the day for me on election day, which they always have to do so. He was in contact with their data guy that evening and saying, we need to make this happen, and you got it? He says, sure, fine. So they started working on it the next morning. So the only person who could work with us with it was the one that Recorder Blair worked with the whole time. And honestly, she might have monopolized this whole time for the whole election, because we weren't the only people having an election, and the whole country had it. You know what? The primary is wonderful, and the presidential preference election is wonderful, and when we have a special election in May is wonderful in the Arizona, because we're like the only players in town across the United States. This company works for many jurisdictions across the United States. It's not a huge company. I think they're 50 to 60 strong, outstanding, as opposed to my vendor that I have for my tabulation equipment, largest in the world, ESNX, Election Systems and Software, probably 1,500 employees worldwide, okay? But for a small company, they do a pretty good job. And I've been, besides I've had my headaches with them, and they've had them with me, all through 2016 and into 2018, but I don't know who else was helping anybody else when it was helping Christie this whole time, so.
I guess I don't have any more questions of Mr. Tempert. I just brought to the board, but it looks like the problem starts with us, maybe not as far as with them, but I think we should probably still look at tidying up our contracts, that we have on the election department service immediately, not next morning or something. That's the only reason I brought it, and I think I've got my answer now. That wasn't quite what I put for backup.
Very good, and thank you for bringing that to our attention, Supervisor Johnson. Mr. Tempert, the early ballots and the mail-in ballots and early voting constituted more than 65% of the total vote, didn't it?
Yeah, about 53, over 51,000, 52,000 versus 21,000. So if you put it together, two and a half times.
Sure. Did you anticipate these numbers?
I did not. I did not at all, actually, on this aspect. You know what? I know historically, this one took me by surprise, to answer your question, at least on the number of people that showed up. We approximately had a 50% higher turnout than we do for a gubernatorial general election. I look back, and I could show you back for all the records that I have going back to 2000, at least I still have sitting around, and we could look back in the clerk's records going back to whenever, you could find that you're really looking at a 42%, 43% turnout. For that type of an election, where we had 63%, I would have lost the bet. I often have bets with, just joking, a percentage turnout with people in my office and, other people just having concern, just a fun thing, right? I would have got clobbered on this one, so we had a ton.
I'll make sure that I make a bet with you on the over and under for the next election.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to lose if it stays with this one. I usually win, though.
Very good. Well, I just wanted to point out to everyone the mass volume of change that's occurring in our election system. Thank you. Any further questions?
Yeah, I have you want to go first? You sure?
Ladies first.
Okay, thank you. I think my question is for Christy Blair. I probably, like all the supervisors, I got a lot of complaints about getting letters from our county after the election saying, whoops, we didn't receive it in time, we couldn't verify your signature, and they felt sort of like their vote wasn't counted. And for instance, on Saturday, this woman she voted like on the 25th. She sent it back on the 26th, and then 2 days after the election, she got it saying that it wasn't accepted, probably for a signature. So, and I know these things with all it's going to happen, but is there something that we can do? I know that there's the Secretary of State website, the Arizona Secretary of State, you can see if your ballot has been accepted. I think that I didn't even know that. Honestly, I didn't know that till this year. So I think that we can do better in education, let people know. And since it's something that seems that, people are really following, that they're going to have to be proactive and make sure that their vote has been counted and has been received, because again, you're talking about the U.S. mail, and that is why everyone says the same thing. I didn't trust the mail. So so many people voted at their poll state, to put their mail ballots, right, at the poll, and then so you're inundated, and you still have to check the signatures. You still have all that work to do. So I think we need a much better education for citizens for the next election. Is there any? Can I send people your way so you can explain to them why their vote wasn't counted?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
We work really hard to do a lot of education. I think what the issue came down to is the first run of ballots was sent out on October 10th. So realistically, within that 5 days, anyone that, and I think we put like the 29th, have it in the mail by then, but a lot of that is the Postal Service. And I worked very closely with the political coordinator for the state of Arizona. I'm confident as far as political mail, but you do have that delay. And so we recommended that, if it's getting down close to that time frame, you really should be dropping it off at an early voting site, drop it off on Election Day, some other mechanism than, and then what the issue was is people return their ballots and they weren't signed at all. Or, we've been through forensic handwriting analysis classes, and if 5 people look at a signature and you typically write your name and then you do a mark, that there is absolutely no recognition. And you have not given us a phone number or an email address, and we have no other mechanism to contact you than to send a letter back in the mail. That likelihood is, your chances become slimmer the closer to the election. And then we also had a court order to try and then recontact them. And my greatest fear was they're going to get that letter. The court order came to me at Friday at 4 o'clock before the election on that following Tuesday. I had letters delivered to the post office at 10:30 that night to be able to go out at 9 o'clock on Saturday morning. But it was kind of ridiculous to me because they were going to get those letters after the election, and it was just going to make them angrier.
That's exactly what happened.
So we do our best, but it was a very successful election. We sent out 68,000 early ballots and got 55,000 back. There was a very small percentage. I think we wound up with all of the efforts, I think we wound up with 4 ballots that were not signed. That's a pretty phenomenal error, and it's the few that do complain, and rightfully so, but it wasn't the vast majority. So.
Supervisor Bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Christy, how did you handle verifying the late mail-in ballots differently than how they did it in Maricopa County? I had heard that they continued to rehabilitate these things until Saturday out following the election.
We had a court order that gave us till,
Thursday.
what was it? It was the Wednesday by 5, right? Yeah.
Wednesday following.
We typically would have not counted any ballots past 7 o'clock on election night.
Okay.
And so,
Supervisor Gould, I can answer that question if you like.
Sure.
So, leading up to the election, there were a few counties who took the position that they could look at those signatures in question after the 7 p.m. deadline of the election. The notable counties were Maricopa County, Pima County, and I think there may have been one other one, I can't remember.
Okay.
And the remaining counties took an opposite position. That was our position, was no, we're done. We count until Election Day at 7 p.m. A lawsuit was filed, sued all of the counties in Mojave, all the counties in Arizona, including Mojave County. The issue then went before the court. All of the parties entered an agreement to say, okay, we're all going to be on the same page, and the page is we will count those until Wednesday at 5 p.m. And that's what that was the resolution of the lawsuit. So it was the Wednesday after the election at 5 p.m.
So, Mr. Esplin, that court order came out on Friday before the election?
No, I don't. Was it the Friday before? I can't remember. I can't remember the dates when it came out. It was all around that same time as when they came out. And then, no, because I don't think so. No, I think it came out after because we were counting. I'm almost positive it was the Friday after.
I believe the AZ GOP filed suit after the election.
Yeah, it was after the election. It was the Friday after. So we had the election on Tuesday, and then I believe it went through. I'm just trying to.
It's a blur.
It was after. It was. I got my calendar here because I remember.
While he's looking, so, basically, Pima and Maricopa were breaking the law. All the other counties were law-abiding, and then the courts came back and said, okay, all the counties can break the law now.
No.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah, that's exactly what happened.
I'm not going to disagree with what a court said. I don't know. No, I mean, it's
That's how I look at it.
yeah. Okay. I can give you the dates here. So it was the Friday after the election. So we had the election on the 6th. It was the Friday after the election is when the ruling came down.
Yeah.
Then letters got sent out, and then it was because the 12th was a day off. It was a holiday. It was the Columbus Day, and then the deadline was then Wednesday at 5.
Right.
So yeah.
So
And then you had a holiday in there, so nobody was going to get their mail.
Yeah.
So, Ms. Blair, when did we cease to verify mail-in ballots then?
Oh, no. We were still counting, a week after the election, probably, verifying the signatures. So,
But could you, if that signature didn't match, what did you do with the ballot?
it was not counted.
Okay. Because I was under the impression that the Maricopa County recorder continued to rehabilitate those ballots up
After
until Saturday.
Wednesday,
So was that the Saturday the 17th? Because
No, it would have been the Saturday following the election.
Yeah, so that was when, and they'd be allowed because that was part of the lawsuit. So you have the 6th was the election, and if there's the Saturday the 10th, and the court allowed them that. And then the last drop dead deadline was Wednesday the 14th. If they did it on the 17th of November, that would be a violation of the court order. But
So we continued to do the same thing up until that following Wednesday?
well, until we had all of the early ballots counted. And yes, that cutoff for what they called curing the
Okay.
ballots was that Wednesday.
Because I also heard that after the normal procedure was to destroy those ballots if they had not been cured by the close of the polls on Election Day.
Destroy the ballots? No. But Election Day is what we were following. 7 p.m. Election Day. If we then after the election, got an early ballot that was dropped off at the polling location on Election Day that either didn't have a signature or there was no way we could verify that signature, that typically is our cutoff, and that ballot will not count. But this court order allowed that to happen until 5 o'clock the Wednesday after the election.
So then you could continue to cure those ballots?
Until 5 o'clock on that following Wednesday, yes.
Thank you.
There was like a day, because you were following the law and stopping it at 7 p.m. on Election Day. So there were people who got the letter, but then they still had their ballots counted. They were, because I personally know several who got the letter, were very upset, but then because of the court order, then they were able to have their votes counted. They were able to go back, and whatever it was, the signature or whatever.
And they had...
That's what was confusing.
Typically, anyone in that situation had already gotten a letter from us saying, please contact us, we can't verify your signature, your ballot. Typically, if we have enough time, we return the ballots for a signature, if there's no signature at all. There comes a point, though, that, you know, we're sending out letters, and if that's the only mechanism we have to contact the voter,
Okay.
hoping that they get that before 7 p.m. on election night. But then when that court order came out, anyone from election day and previously either got a second letter or the first letter. So they were all notified of their status.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to beat a dead horse.
Supervisor Johnson.
We're talking about a lot of, possible people that didn't get to vote, but in reality, how many votes did we reject out of the, would you say, 55,000, 56,000?
Out of 55,000, off the top of my head, I know that I sent out, after the court order, I sent out approximately 82 letters.
So it's a real small amount, and you don't just randomly pick them out and send them out. It's somebody didn't sign or the signatures changed or something, so it's not really the county's fault on those. It's the part of the person, and they didn't give us any way to notify them, because I know people don't like to give anybody their phone numbers anymore, so mail is basically all we have to contact them. That's
It
all,
was
Mr.
a
Chair.
very small percentage in the grand scheme of everything that was happening.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Christy. Christy Blair. Alan Tempert, thank you very much. Any further questions, discussion? Did you get your
No.
questions answered?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Supervisor Johnson?
Thank you.
Did you want to take any action, or just use
It's
it
up
as-
to the board. It sounds like it's partly our fault for not running a check on it to begin with, so.
Okay. All right, on to number 45, discussion, possible action. Direct staff to bring back to the board within 30 days the legal qualifications for each member currently sitting on the Building Code Advisory Board. Brought to us by Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I kept putting backup. There's just one that's been brought to my attention. This person is sitting on the board forever. Was put on the board as an engineer, is not qualified as an engineer, and is still listed as an engineer. So that's why I brought it up, that we need to check to make sure these people are working in the correct position, that are appointed to the correct position that they should be in. I don't know how that sits with our committee, but I just brought it forward with the violation.
Thank you. And I'll guess I'll ask Mr. Esplin for a direction on how to proceed.
Okay, so let me pull up the item. I'm trying to multitask here. Okay, so it's 11 862 is where you start. That's the starting point. And 11862 says if you have a building code advisory board, you have to have these people, right? And it's got to be an architect, professional engineer, general contractor, person representing the public, person engaged in the electrical, mechanical, or plumbing trade. Those are 5. You can have a board between 5 to 7 people. The additional 2, if you choose to have the additional 2, they may be additional members may be engaged in the construction and design industry. Okay, so and we have a 7-person board. I think if there's any challenge to this, if you were to go into court and say that the judge said, well, you know, if someone says, hey, it's an illegal board, they don't have it. I think what the judge is going to do, and I'm just guessing, but I think the judge is probably going to say, okay, do you meet these qualifications? And if our board meets those qualifications, I think the judge is going to say, why are we even here? Why are we discussing this? Because they meet the qualifications. They meet this. If we have one that's a licensed architect, if we have one that's a licensed professional engineer, and we get those, boom, we have them. Now, so that's the premise. And we just have to make sure that we have those. The way the board currently is constituted, we meet those criteria. At least from my knowledge, from what I've looked at, it looks like we meet 11862. Now, Supervisor Johnson is correct that at various times people have been appointed and that appointment to that specific spot changed, engineer to general contractor. Now, if the board wishes to change the makeup of the board and say, you know, originally this person was an engineer, went to that, then the board can do that. Absolutely. That's something that the board can do because you've done that at various times. Back in 2017, I believe is when it was brought before. Back in 2017, these people were at these positions. And if you can say, well, that person isn't qualified for that, and we don't want to do that, then you can change that if that's what you wish to do. So it's really up to the board if you want to do that or not. So take, for example, in the 2017, if I can find that item. Excuse me, 2018. 2018 is when it was brought back. So July of 2018, at that time, there were 4 members on the board. So July of 2018, 4 members of the board. And at that time, they listed Mehdi Azarmi as the general contractor, Keith Walker as the general contractor, general contractor and electrician, Doug McKee as the general contractor, and Toby Orr as the professional engineer and general contractor. So they listed those 4 as those, and then they said, okay, we need to fill these 3 more appointments. We need to fill the architect position, a person representing the public, and an unspecified position. Well, after that was done, after that was appointed, we still list Mehdi Azarmi as the general contractor. Well, if you don't think that he's qualified for that, if you don't think he has a license for that, then you may say, okay, we want to switch him and take him out of that role and have him be in the the person engaged in the construction design industry. You can do that. That's up to you. That's up to the board. The point is this. You want to make sure that you're following 11862, that each person is licensed, and that's what they're licensed for. That's what ultimately you want to get at. As the board currently stands right now, we have a licensed architect, we have a licensed engineer, we have a licensed general contractor, we have a person representing the public, and we have a person engaged in electrical, and then we have people engaged in the construction and design industry. That's how it currently is. Now, if you want to say, but we didn't appoint this person to do this, it's changed, then go ahead and change it. If that's what you wish to do, you can do that.
Mr. Chair, thank you. The problem is we appointed somebody as an engineer when they weren't a licensed engineer. We carried them as a contractor when they weren't a contractor. And while I understand we can go to court and they say, well, we had all those positions filled, but who are we lying to here? I mean, that's up to us. Somebody needs to check that, either the staff when it comes to us or, you know, at least so we know. I mean, if the person could obviously sit as a citizen on there, but we just at least need to know that information.
Certainly, I don't disagree with anything you said. I don't disagree. Although, I mean, there is a question of whether somebody meets the definition of general contractor or not, and that's kind of a different debate. But I agree with what you're saying. Yes.
Chairman Watson?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, and maybe we should revisit, since it does change so often, and again, these all volunteer, unpaid board members. Maybe we should check out the things every year since they seem to be changing. But again, it's the county's responsibility to vet them unless somebody lied on their application. I don't believe that's the fact. So it's up to the county to make sure that these statutes are being followed.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's it? We have one person signed up to speak to item number 45. Mr. Boone.
Michael Boone, 2210 Palo Verde North, Lake Havasu City. Show Mr. Watson the backup that I have so he doesn't think I got it by nefarious means. It came off of your website.
Very good.
One of the questions that I had in reading this was the application should contain in it who they're related to. If they're sitting on this board and they're related to somebody that's on the board, as Board of Supervisors, so you should disclose it regardless of what affinity they have. Or I can never pronounce that big word, but Mr. Esplin knows what I'm talking about, consigliarity. But, thank you. But they shouldn't have been a campaign manager for somebody sitting on the board. And they shouldn't be a high campaign contributor to somebody sitting on the board. They should hold the correct licenses. And all those things should be on the application. Now, I know you all have these applications in front of you because they're part of the agenda item. Half of them aren't even filled out. There's lines drawn through them. So whoever's vetting them is vetting them on who they're putting down as a reference. And I think if you're going to have a board that's going to have credibility and integrity, they should fit the actual positions that they hold, like Mr. Johnson said, and they shouldn't have any relationship to a county employee, especially a county management employee or a board member. And that just gives it credibility and keeps people like me from coming up here questioning the integrity of it. So that's where I would start, is at the application, fixing the application, and then putting exactly what seat they're going to hold. And if they're going to move out of that seat, change it correctly so it doesn't look like there's anything impropriety. People can only respond to what they see.
Thank you, Mr. Boone. Well, we've gathered a number of recommendations and thoughts.
I'm just wondering who I'm related to this time.
If you need a motion, Mr. Chair, I guess the motion would be to refer to staff to verify the qualifications of all people on the commission and bring back to the board.
That'd probably be appropriate.
Is that a motion? Was that a motion?
Yes.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second to investigate the legal qualifications for each member currently sitting on Building Code Advisory Board, but I think we want to include all boards maybe.
All boards? Sure.
Also, wouldn't that be to ratify rather than to ratify the...
Not my motion. Supervisor Johnson's motion.
Well, you just, I could amend it to do all boards and commissions that have requirements. We don't have too many of them that do, but that have qualifications.
Qualifications are required.
And just bring back to the board if there's any that need to be changed.
Chairman Watson, may I ask for some clarity here? So you just mean the qualifications as designated by the state statute. What Mr. Boone was talking about is outside the statute. I mean, there's no, being a contributor to a campaign is not something that would disqualify somebody from being on like a volunteer board. This is unpaid volunteer boards that are thankless. And we thank our board members that do this, some of them travel long distances. So I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. We're only talking about what's statutorily required for these boards and commissions.
Yes, qualifications
Right.
is my motion.
And
The others will
licensing.
have to be addressed by board item if somebody wants to do it.
Okay. We have a motion and a second, I believe.
Mr. Chairman.
Supervisor Gould.
You may want to have staff re-verify these things on an annual basis, because license expires, license gets revoked, and those kind of things. So you might want to take a look at it, not just when it's a new appointee, but annually.
That's a good point.
So what is the actual motion?
Motion is refer to staff to review all boards and commissions where state qualifications are required by Arizona revised statutes and bring back to the board for anything that needs to be changed.
So is that, you
And we
didn't
have a
say
second,
annually, but,
Well, I thought I might have to do a different motion, another agenda item, because I didn't really have that one. Well, that's a good point Supervisor Gould brings up. I don't know that Mr. Esplin would allow that to go in. Maybe to make it clean, we just make another agenda item to say.
Put it on a different agenda item,
I would
just to
think.
make it safe.
Probably be best. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? There being none, Madam Clerk?
Supervisor Angus?
Yes.
Supervisor Johnson?
Yes.
Supervisor Bishop?
yes.
Supervisor Gould?
Yes.
Chairman Watson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. On to item number 46, discussion, possible action, direct staff to obtain and release all documents, backup, and exhibits within 30 days from the investigation into the employee complaints regarding Mojave County Developmental Services and Building Department operation that was first brought before this board on August 20th, 2018. I have 3 people signed up to speak to this item. This item is brought to us by Supervisor Johnson. Supervisor Johnson, do you have a few things to say before we hear from our audience?
I don't believe so. I think it's pretty much all said in the back of it.
Thank you. Matt Smith.
I was going to start out with good morning, but I guess it's almost good afternoon now. Good afternoon, Chairman Watson, our distinguished Board of Supervisors, Madam Clerk, Attorney Ryan Esplin, County Manager Mike Hendricks. The reason I am here today is as your attorney giving you legal advice in my capacity as county attorney and also representing the position of ASEP and the attorney that they hired that originally was involved in this matter, in this investigation. Mr. Hendricks wanted to accomplish 2 things when this originated. One was transparency, and in particular, his position was there's some allegations being made, which I'm not going to discuss in any detail at this time, because I don't want to do anything that could impact the privilege that this matter has already fallen under. And I'm talking about the report that was given to the board in executive session. And I believe Mr. Gould did receive a copy of that. Is that correct?
Yes. Since I've been sworn in, I have received a copy of that.
Excellent. So Mr. Hendricks' position was, if there anything floating around out there, any accusations at all, I want to see an investigation done. We did nothing wrong, absolute transparency. The second thing he wanted to accomplish was an opportunity to have someone from the outside take a look at how we're doing things and make recommendations as to whether or not we can do anything to improve things, make our organization better. So Mr. Hendricks, I believe, wanted to do this investigation or wanted it to be done, but then he found out when he looked into it that it wasn't really up to him. It wasn't his authority to pursue this. But when ASEP found out about it, they're the ones who actually authorized this investigation. That's what they do. They try to protect the county from liability. Between our office and ASEP, we successfully defend a lot of lawsuits, a lot of notice of claims. We get notice of claims all the time. Our office gets sued a lot because we're prosecuting people that aren't happy with us. So our office is involved, ASEP is involved, and a lot of times we get these things tossed without any liability, without any money going out, and without the board having to be involved. We get the board involved when it is necessary for you to be involved, which would be to authorize a settlement, or if something exposes the county to a lot of liability, then we want you to be aware of it. But there's a lot of things that are handled within county departments that aren't things that you need to be involved in, frankly. They're beneath what you do. ASEP hired Jim Jellison, very successful independent lawyer, excellent employment lawyer. I've known him for a long time. He's handled some of our employee grievances in the past. He employed an investigator named Keith Zabrowski. Mr. Zabrowski is very thorough, he's independent, he's professional. He's done a couple of our investigations involving employee grievances in the past. As you probably saw, maybe to your chagrin, he did a 58-page report, single-spaced. This report was given to you in executive session and is privileged. The details can only be discussed in executive session. So any discussion today of any of those details needs to be done in executive session. If there was anything, you'll have to excuse me, I have a cold, of a criminal nature involved, it would have been prosecuted. There are two main reasons that we believe that the board should not vote in favor of this. One of them is to protect the employees. There were many interviews done in this case. These interviews were done, and the employees gave a lot of detail concerning things that they were aware of. These details were given under the aura of confidentiality. The employees were told that these things were confidential. If you vote to disclose these things and they're available to the public, the newspaper could print these things, take them out of context. So, for example, you might have an employee that criticized our county manager or criticized his department head, or maybe criticized or made comments about one of you, the Board of Supervisors. Then that ends up in the newspaper. They're talking about their supervisor, other employees, coworkers. That would be very embarrassing. It could put them in jeopardy. They might fear retaliation. And in the future, they're not going to cooperate anymore. They're not going to give the detail that you saw in this very lengthy report. Secondly, we want to avoid litigation. And this is a situation that, from reading the report, anybody would be aware of. It could lead into various areas of exposure. If something happened to any of the employees, there could be litigation involved, and that is obviously something that we would like to stop from happening. There are legitimate business reasons that organizations conduct internal investigations with the aid of experienced attorneys. By conducting an objective, thorough, and confidential investigation with the assistance of legal counsel, in this case with ASEP and with Jim Jellison, supervisors and employees can more candidly share information and ideas. The supervising attorney and his staff can more freely work with supervisors and witnesses to discuss the case issues as well as the protections that would be afforded to employees who provide information while these investigations are going on.
Perhaps most importantly, the information obtained can be used as a tool to improve government operations. So, in other words, maintaining the confidentiality of this investigation allows it to be used as a tool to solve problems, and not as a tool for persons who might want to involve our county in litigation. There are other options available to the board. One of the options is to have Jim Jellison come before you and appear and discuss this in the future. He would do this in executive session. He is willing to come down from Phoenix and meet with you and address you and answer any questions that you might have. I'm not saying this would be the best option. Obviously, it would result in more money being expended by the county, but he is willing to do that and tell you the purpose of the investigation and answer any questions you might have. So basically, your options are to vote in favor of this, item 46, to vote against it, or to ask for Mr. Jellison to come up here and have it discussed in executive session. And I would be happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
Thank you, Matt. Supervisor Angus, I believe you had your hand up.
So is there an option D? I mean, can the interviews and exhibits just be released to the board? Why do we need Mr. Jellison to make the trip up here? Why can't we see it if that's what Supervisor Johnson wants? My problem, like yours, is the public part of it. Because you're right, people, can I ask you something? When people are interviewed by the investigator, is there some kind of disclaimer that they're told before they start answering? Are they told it's confidential? Do they sign something?
I don't believe they sign anything. I think they are told they do sign something. Okay, Mr. Hendricks, I think, can answer that question.
Mr. Chairman, a Garrity, we all signed a Garrity letter which stated that we couldn't discuss it. And, and other things, it's a standard Garrity letter that was prepared.
And do you know whether or not everybody, because there were at least 25 to 30, if not more, interviews done in this case?
It was my understanding everybody did. I signed one.
Right, so that's
the answer
problematic.
to your question then is yes.
Right.
If you wanted these items, which would be the background materials, any other exhibits, interviews that were done, maybe some of the interviews were actually taped, those materials could be provided to you and only you, the board, in executive session, with the same prohibitions from disclosing these that would apply.
So since I've been here, we've done like 2 or 3 investigations that was the same protocol. We saw the executive summary. It wasn't made public, and again, for all these reasons. And I mean, the sort of unintended consequence of complete transparency is that is, I don't believe, and I'm going to ask if you agree with this, that why would anybody come forward anymore if everything they say or they think is confidential is not going to be confidential? It's so problematic. Now, I went back in some other investigations. There was an investigation in 2004. It was a sexual harassment claim against a supervisor. But in the agenda item itself, they said it would be made public. So maybe a solution to this is before any investigation comes, it would come before the board, and we could make that decision whether or not it should be public or not before, so people know. I just think of it as an employee. I would be very upset if after I was assured it was confidential, it was made public, and I think that we would have some big liability in that. So I think that the board should see it, but I would definitely not going to support making it public at this point.
I think that is a fair point, and I think that some employees might feel that they have to cooperate and could possibly feel coerced, but you have other people that are interviewed that could easily say, I don't really want to get involved, and not really tell what they know. And I think under the way that this investigation was done, people were encouraged to speak freely. And I think you would lose that if you did release this publicly. So, fair point.
Supervisor Gould has a
To
question.
that point, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hendricks, did you say that the form that the people that were interviewed signed said that the people that were interviewed would not discuss the interview?
That's correct.
So the premise that rabbit trail we just went on was the opposite way, because they held themselves to a standard that they would not discuss it, not that their interview would not be discussed. To me, that's a 180 degrees out of the line that we were just following. Thank you.
I have some questions, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Johnson.
At the beginning, Mr. Smith, you said that you're representing ASIP here today?
No, I'm just giving you their position. I don't represent them, but I'm giving you my opinion, which is just my opinion, because you as a board, of course, are free to do what you want. But I also have discussed this with ASIP's attorney that was hired to do the investigation, Mr. Jellison. And I've discussed it with him, and this is what he thinks is the best practice. Now, his job is to, help the county, but overall, his thing is to protect us from ourselves sometimes. For example, if I have an employee that I want to fire, we'll usually go to HR, and if it's a complicated issue, then we'll talk to someone like him, and we've talked to him in the past, and he'll tell us, no, that's not a good idea because this employee is in a protected class, or this employee has put themselves in a whistleblower situation. So that would not be a good idea, and it would not be appropriate to get rid of them at this time. Or alternatively, he'll say, yeah, you do have grounds to get rid of this person.
But he's not making decisions at ASIP regarding this matter.
No.
You also said that if we decided on going further and having these things done, this would cost us more money?
I just was saying that, and I don't know the answer to the question about whether or not we've met our deductible or any of those things. I don't want to put Mr. Hendricks on the spot, but he might know more about that than I do, because I'm not privy to that information. I'm just saying that, Mr. Jellison bills at whatever he bills at as a top attorney with almost 30 years' experience. But he would be willing, and that might be covered, and we might not be having to pay anything more. I don't know if we've met our deductible. It is December. But he would be willing to come here and answer any questions you have.
Do we know what it's cost us so far? Roundabout, guess?
I don't know the answer to that question, no.
Because, well...
Mr. Chairman, I believe, and I don't know the nuances, but I believe it's ASAP has it on their books for less than $50,000. So I don't know what the final tally is going to be, but I would assume it's going to be in the neighborhood of $30,000 to $40,000 that ASAP has on their books.
Thank you.
Okay.
Supervisor Johnson?
Yes, thank you. If it's 30 or if there's money that has been expended, they're not doing that out of the kindness of their heart. That's coming out of our end.
Correct.
Then this work product is our work product. I worked after we had our executive session, and I'd got with Mr. Esplin to try to get it, see if we could all get a copy. I asked for myself, but obviously it was everybody have it. And he worked on it for a couple of weeks, I want to say, and got nowhere. And finally, frustration or whatever else, so I wouldn't keep blaming him for not getting it. He put me in contact with the attorney that Mr. Smith is mentioning, who was a very nice guy, who was on vacation and got back with me and called me numerous times. And finally he said, I think it's Bill Hardy is not going to let you have this. So I then sent a letter to Mr. Hardy with the same requests and an email advising him that I would send him a letter. To this day, I've not heard from Mr. Hardy. I think if we as a board have spent money on this, and I was curious as to why, like you said at the beginning, Mr. Smith, I'm sure there's a lot of investigations that go on that we are not privy to, nor should we be privy to, that this one must have reached such a height that it was brought to us, but then we are not allowed to see the entire investigation, which I don't like the executive summary what we got. I guess that's why I brought it to the board. I didn't like that we spend a lot of money with ASIP and to just have them tell us to pound sand and not even return a letter or email was amazing to me.
I understand, how you feel about it, and I might feel the same way. I would just point out two things. Number one, I don't call anything Keith Sobrowski does a summary, because 58 pages single space is basically a 116-page report. So I found it very tedious. It took me about 3 hours to read it. So I don't think there was a lot of detail that is not found in his report that would be available if you got other things. But I believe that, as I stated earlier, if the board votes that you want these other materials and you want the backup materials, Mr. Jellison is willing to do it. He's willing to come up here and meet with everybody and explain and answer any questions you might have, and also provide those materials in executive session. I think there's a big difference between doing it in executive session, where it's just given to the board, and then all these other people, including the county employees and the county itself, are protected, as opposed to the general way this agenda item is written, which to me could mean, and I'm not going to speak for you, that this whole report could be just released to the public. So I'm not sure if that's what you wanted, or if you just wanted the board to receive it. But, my concern in reading the item was, are you asking that this be released to the public where it could get to the newspaper or anybody could have it? And I think that would irritate and cause a lot of problems with a lot of people that were involved in this process, that were more than willing to discuss things willingly and even criticize people inside their chain of command, which I think is good information that we have, but those employees, I don't think would cooperate in the future if they knew this information was released and was released publicly and maybe even got in the newspaper. So
to answer that, I never thought about it being public. It was just to be made available to other board members, and if it does something the board does do, then I would request that it's released prior to us having an executive session, because last time it was released in an executive session, you have no, at least if you're able to consume it and make some decisions on questions you have or don't have, or it answers all your questions. But as I haven't seen I don't believe I've seen the original complaint. Is the original complaint in that 58 pages or not?
I think so. It was a summary of the complaint.
I don't know if
Go
I
into the
can
details
answer
of the
that
report.
question.
Well, no, I'm just asking if it was in there, for another question I have.
Well, I'd recommend you refer to the report to determine whether it is in there or not. You're going to have to look for yourself to determine whether it's in there. I don't want to discuss it out in public whether it's in there or not. I don't want to talk about the contents of what's in there.
Okay, well, let me, I'll go at it this way then. Excluding the report, you're telling me that ASIP, if somebody brings to them a complaint of criminal wrongdoing, we have our employees, we tell them that whatever they say is super secret and they'll never have to go to court, and we're worried about hurting their feelings? If we have something criminal going on inside this county, any investigation that should be done, why are we having an investigation if we're not going to use anything? That has really upset me with what you're saying has been done with this investigation. And I'm not just saying this investigation, but I guess all of them must be done by ASIP that way is what I'm thinking.
If there is a situation that involves potential criminal liability, and I become aware of it, or someone in my office becomes aware of it, there's one of two things that are going to happen. Either number one, we're going to file criminal charges, and I'm speaking in general terms, or number two, if it's involving somebody that's well-known, like, for example, obviously, we would not prosecute a board member or a high-ranking county official, just like law enforcement officers that we work with. So we would send it to another county or the Attorney General's office, and they would do a review and decide whether or not criminal charges would be filed. So there's nothing about this process that would prohibit criminal prosecution. And if I felt that there was a crime involved that was something that could be proved, and our charging standard is reasonable likelihood of conviction, then we would do one of those two things.
All right, I guess unless you have somebody else from the county that wants to talk, I still kind of stand by what I put on this, that I think that we need to have this thorough investigation brought where we can read it, and then if we need to ask questions of their attorney later or not, that's, you know, that's up to the board. But I have faith in the board. All board members have received the information before. I didn't see it in the front page, you know, with people releasing it or anything, but I'm not worried about leaks from this board.
May I ask Supervisor Johnson a question? So I'm confused. So you're just asking that it be released to the board, not
I've
public?
ever asked. Yes.
I have no problem with that. I mean, I think if any board member wants to see something like that, they should. And, you know, whether or not ASIP agrees or not, I don't think, because they are trying to protect us, but, you know, if we want to really know, you know, when we get the executive summary, that's their interpretation of the interviews. And, you know, they have a idea. So I think that if Supervisor Johnson wants to see it, I see no reason not to let him, or me.
And, Mr. Chairman, if I can address the board.
Mr. Hendricks.
It's my understanding that the Executive Director, Bill Hardy, said that if the board requested it, he would certainly provide it, and there was no question. So I just wanted to be clear on that. So if the board so was inclined or so chose, you could direct staff to contact ASAP, and we could provide it to the board, the details of the report. And I would hopefully ask that the board take our Attorney Matt Smith's recommendation and at least provide that to the board during executive session, so there is some guaranteed level of confidentiality, and then at some future date soon after the board has the time to digest it, if you so chose, maybe the report's going to explain to you all what you need to know or what you want to know. But if you did want to get Attorney Jellison up here, I could certainly request that of Bill Hardy, because he works for him, to see if he can send him up for another executive session to answer any questions that the board might have.
Instead of spending the money to bring Mr. Jellison up, why can't we just read it first and then see if we have questions we want to ask him?
And Chairman Supervisor Angus, that's what I said. I said provide it to you in executive session, let you digest it, and if the board felt necessary to have Attorney Jellison come up to explain it or to ask any questions, then we could make that I could try to make that available to you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hendricks. Supervisor Gould.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Smith, there's people in that report that were accused. Have those people been provided the same report that I have received?
I don't want to say whether or not anybody's been accused, because I don't want to talk about any of the contents, just to be extra careful. To my knowledge, I don't believe anybody has received a copy of that report other than the attorneys involved and the board.
Thank you.
Mr. Esplin?
I assume county manager has received the report as well.
I received the same report.
Did you hear that?
Yes.
Okay.
My turn.
Supervisor Bishop.
Thank you, Chairman Watson. ACIP represents us, and I trust that they do a good job, as far as I know. And Mr. Jellison, as you stated, is a 30-year veteran, investigator, attorney, and he provided us with this 58-page single-spaced report, which I read again over this weekend. And it looks like a very good summary, and it leaves out a lot of the question and answer interview type pages, which I assume would be several hundred pages of boring testimony, which I'm very familiar with, as you know. So I don't feel like I need the intimate details. If this 30-year veteran summarized it in his opinion, and he works for ACIP, who represents us, that's good enough for me in my professional opinion as a former law enforcement officer. But I agree, if the board insists on seeing this very detailed report, I think it should be done in executive session, and I think we should schedule at least a day, maybe 2 days, to review all of this information, to come to what I would assume would be the same conclusion with no criminal liability to the county. And I see the only purpose of doing this is just curiosity, of which I am not. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Bishop.
You're welcome. Interviews are so boring.
Again, for clarity, so if we were to vote to get the backup materials, we would see them before. I mean, in investigations past, I remember when we first took office, we had one involving an ex-risk manager, and it was so secretive that they wouldn't even send an email. It was hand-delivered. I mean, that's what we go through. I mean, that's the confidentiality that we strive for, I think. So what would the process be? Would we get it? I know Supervisor Johnson wants to see it before. I mean, would we have to like go into a room and read it, or would we be able to get it?
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Angus, that's all a lot of theatrics that we go through with, like you said, at certain times we treat certain ones differently. There's nothing to stop the county attorney or his assistant, the county attorney, from emailing us stuff that we get all the time that says confidential, you're not to release it. It's up to the discretion of the board members whether they're going to follow law or not, whether we get held in super secret, meeting, or it's mailed to us and asked not to do it. It's all up to the character of the board whether they release it, no matter what the attorneys do. I mean, I'm of the opinion that it gets emailed to us. If somebody sees something that they have, they say, hey, I request an executive session to do it, or we look at it and go, it's exactly what the man wrote down. But I really have a problem when these people not only refuse to give us to us, refuse to basically even talk to a board member on it, with all the money we pay these people.
Well, Supervisor Johnson, that wasn't the case that they refused it. We certainly could have it anytime we want.
No, they refused to give it to me, or to the board, and the attorney said that, and he was apologetic for it. He said, it's not my decision. He said, it's Bill Hardy is the one that's doing it, and that's why I sent the letter to Bill Hardy, and I don't know if I put a copy of the letter in the backup or not, but I could give it to everybody.
Well, ultimately, you are entitled to see it, regardless of the information you got, and I apologize if, I had heard that you had some difficulties, and this confirms it, but the board is certainly entitled to this. I think that the cleanest way and the safest way to do it, if you're going to vote to get all the backup materials, which would be taped interviews, any witness statements, any other exhibits, that the best way to get it would be in an executive session, and then you could have another executive session in the future where you could either have Jim Jellison or even the investigator, Keith Zabrowski, come here to answer further questions, or you might decide on your own that you've seen everything and you don't think there's anything else you need to do. But that's up to the board. So.
And the tape stuff, I'm assuming they've transcribed. I mean, nobody leaves stuff on tape anymore.
I would say that the chances that they're transcribed are probably less than 1%. But
Really?
Really?
I can't imagine that, but I'm not sure. Unless Ryan has any other information on that.
I don't know.
Okay, well,
Had somebody else to speak before I can make the motion?
we still have a couple more speakers who would like to speak to this item, but we're open for a motion, if you care to make a motion at this point.
Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion to direct staff to get a complete copy of the aforementioned investigation to be given to board members with executive session privileges.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for the documents to be released in executive session. Is that pretty close?
Right. Doesn't mean that we can't, if it's, obviously it's going to be a big thing, so I don't expect us to sit there for a day and a half and read it in the executive session, but.
Very good. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Before we go any further, we still have a couple of people that would like to speak, so. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Smith. Mr. Robinson.
Steve Robinson, Golden Valley. My plan to speak went in a totally different direction after listening to Mr. Smith, and I want Supervisor Johnson to know I wholeheartedly agree with this being released to the board. One name was brought up in this, and that was Mr. Sobrasky. And why is his name relevant to me at this point? Back from 2008 to 2012, maybe even a little bit earlier, there were numerous, I know of at least 3 private investigative background reports pulled on private citizens and probably on at least 1 or 2 board members sitting up there now because they were political enemies of the status quo at that time. And my one point on that issue before I go any further is Thomas Jefferson said, when the people fear its government, there is tyranny. And when the government fears its people, there is liberty. When you have county employees that are so afraid of their senior leaders that they have to speak in private, then you've got a problem with tyranny in our county. I know of at least one other investigation that never got started, or one that was done, but it was a total hit piece. And in that investigation, 2 county employees were threatened with their jobs if they did not lie under oath in a meeting regarding, in a employee investigation meeting done by the Merit Commission. That was it, the Merit Commission. I have the evidence, I brought it with me today, to say there needs to be an investigation into that issue. Because when you have county officials that so bully not just the public with outrageous planning and zoning guidelines, but threats of firing if you speak out and all that stuff, then we have a problem in our county. And so, Supervisor Johnson, I agree with you that this should be released to the board. And if my county, or the attorney that was for the fire board, who's an expert on public bodies, he pointed out that unless the fire chief at that time was specifically involved in presenting information, he was not to be even in that meeting, just the board, a secretary, and the attorneys that were involved. And so if he is correct in that, then that I would say that no other person that's not making the presentation would be in that board meeting. Thank you.
Thanks.
Michael Boone?
On a daily basis, I work with reports that police officers have filed, insurance people have filed, insurance investigators have filed. And summaries are written to fit an agenda. Summaries are written to determine how you want the case to outcome. Summaries are written to get somebody prosecuted or to get somebody released. So Mr. Johnson's absolutely right. You should be looking at every single interview. You should be listening to every single word that's spoken. And you should go back and ask every employee that was interviewed, do you have a problem about releasing this? Because I think you might get the surprise of your life how many of those employees would love to have this released to the public. The public should know why the investigation was started. Mr. Hendricks and you, Mr. Watson, know about two different meetings. One where Mr. Hendricks said that he didn't order the investigation, and then he had to walk that back. And then I produced the email that shows that he did order the investigation. It's in your packet. Every one of you have it from the packet I sent Ms. Anderson. Well, on 9/20, I submitted a public records request. And in that public records request, I asked for emails between February 1st and I think it was February 10th. This email was written on February 7th. This was not included in the public records request, nor was the email that Mr. Hendrick alleged he sent to every board member saying there was going to be an investigation done. Well, two emails did pop up. One with Mr. Hendricks and the gentleman in charge of human resources, Cunningham. And they're talking about it on February 7th, and there's not one word mentioned about the insurance carrier, I don't know their name right now, being the one that requested this investigation. So as far as transparency goes, Mr. Smith's right. There has to be some transparency. This thing hasn't had transparency since day one. And it started when Mr. Hendricks made the comment. He never requested that, and he walked it back, and I produced the email that he did. So that's not transparency. Even though you get this investigation, I would hope to God you'd send this to another outside agency to look at this and review it and listen to all this stuff. Because just based on what I know from people telling me, we have a problem. And if the general public knew that problem, this place would be packed. And many of you can look at me bewildered, but you know I'm right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Boone. Mr. Smith, can I ask you a couple more questions?
And Mr. Chairman, just for clarification for the public, I said in the meeting I never contracted for, Cunningham never contracted for, the county never contracted for. That's an absolutely correct statement, and I stand by it. Thank you.
Thank you. In all the reading that you managed to do on this situation, is there any hint, innuendo, obvious or somewhat unobvious? Is there any collusion? Is there any unwilling or unknowing conspirators? Is there anything in what you read that is all of an item that we could bring to the court for charges, whether it would be a misdemeanor or a felony?
I would answer the question this way. So again, as to not damage the protection of the privilege that's been afforded the materials that you were previously provided. In general terms, I would state that if being aware of any criminal activity, whether it was a misdemeanor or a felony, if our office becomes aware of that, we are either A, going to prosecute it, or B, if we felt there was a conflict of interest, or it would have looked like it was improper for us to make a decision on a particular matter, we would send it to either Coconino County, Yavapai County, or to the Attorney General's office. So if there was any criminal activity that was brought to our attention, then we would do something about it.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Johnson.
Thank you. You weren't in an executive session with us. How did you get a copy of the report?
As
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor.
All right.
Yes. Right.
Does that satisfy? Any further questions for Matt? Thank you very much. I just
Thank you.
wanted to make sure that there was no question in anyone's mind that there's a preponderance of any misdeeds. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. We've had a great deal of discussion. Any further discussion?
Reread, please.
The motion is to direct staff to obtain a complete copy of the investigation to be given to the Board of Supervisor members with executive session privilege.
That satisfy?
Mm-hmm.
I believe Supervisor Gould second the motion. Is that correct? That's correct. Okay.
Yeah, yes, he did. That's
Okay. Okay. Any further discussion, comment? Madam Clerk, roll call.
Supervisor Angus?
Yes.
Supervisor Johnson?
Yes.
Supervisor Bishop?
Yes.
Supervisor Gould?
Yes.
Chairman Watson?
Well, no.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
That's just for executive session, though.
That is most definitely for executive session only. On to item number 47, discussion possible action, establish and select a process to appoint qualified electors to fill the 3 vacant seats on the Pine Lake Fire District Board as required by the Arizona Revised Statutes 48-803. Supervisor Bishop, have you got a recommendation?
Actually, our attorney, Ryan Esplin, has researched this, and the board members, that term is expiring. There's 3 of them, and their term will be expiring, or has expired now. So there's not a quorum left with the Pine Lake Fire Department to fill these vacancies. So it is our responsibility as a board to fill these vacancies, or at least a minimum of 1, so that they will have a quorum. So it's up to this board to decide how we want to proceed, and I'll turn that discussion over to Mr. Esplin.
So Supervisor Bishop is correct. I'm not going to rehash that. The question is now the procedure, and I was just thinking something similar to when it was advertised to fill Supervisor Moss's position. Advertise it. We could, put a notice in the local paper if you want, or contact the fire board there and say, hey, put it on your website or post it there, something like that to get the word out to people. If you then want to submit applications to the board here, and then you guys can review it and then make the selection, whatever process you guys want to do, but they need your help, essentially is what they need.
Okay, Chairman Watson, if I could point out that the Pine Lake Fire Board did meet on November the 19th, and they are recommending an appointment for a person that's currently on the board. And the email states that they did put a notice of vacancy out in that area, and she was the only one that submitted a letter of interest. So that's where Pine Lake is now. They're willing to accept this appointment, although I don't think it's agendized that way. So I think we really do need to advertise at least until the next board meeting, and then appoint this person, or if there's others interested, then we'd have to make that decision at that time.
I agree. I don't think the agenda item would allow us to pick that lady, would it?
That's correct. We're not picking one today. The agenda item does not allow us to pick us today. Today is to establish and select a process. My recommendation would be to contact the fire board and ask them to post it on their website. And also, we could put a notice in the newspaper if you wish, and give them a deadline, have them submit the applications here to the board, and then the board will make a decision about which persons they want to appoint to that board.
Mr. Chairman?
Supervisor Johnson.
If we're going to do the advertising, obviously we take that out of the fire district's money, but it should be done to the clerk here. I mean, if you're going to the fire district board, how do we know they're forwarding everything to us, or not just, keeping it away from us? And then what is if you can only find one person to fulfill it, can they run a district with one person?
No, they've got, so it's a 5-person board, there's
Two are
two
there?
that are still currently, their term expires in 2 years.
All right.
The other 3 just expired on November 30th. So there's 3 vacancies. The statute says board fills the vacancies. If you have 3 qualified applicants, I recommend you put on 3. If you only have 2 that's qualified, put on 2. If you only have 1, put on 1. At least if you get to 3, then they can function as a board. They need to get to that 3 in order to have a quorum.
Right.
So,
So Chairman Watson,
I'm sorry. Looks like Ginny, the clerk of the board, had something to say as well.
Chairman Watson, board members, in the past, when we've done appointments to this board specifically, what we've done is the county put out a press release out of county management's office that specified to submit their letters of interest, application, resume to my office so they can be forwarded to you, and then we agendized for appointment. We did not do a newspaper publication, we did a press release.
And I defer to the clerk. I'm just, it's whatever process you guys wish to do, so.
okay, Chairman Watson, I'm prepared to make that motion.
Okay.
Okay, make a motion that Mojave County does a press release asking anyone interested in the Pine Lake Fire Department Board to submit a letter of interest before the, well, Jenny, you can give me a date, before the date that the clerk of the board will provide, and then have it agendized for the next meeting for possible appointment. Plural.
If you're looking to have it agendized at the next meeting, those letters would have to be received by the 13th.
I think time is of the essence because right now they can't do any business at all, so, okay, that would be my motion.
And a second, Supervisor Angus. Questions? There no further discussion? Madam Clerk?
Supervisor Angus? Yes. Supervisor Johnson?
Yes.
Supervisor Bishop?
Yes.
Supervisor Gould?
Yes.
Chairman Watson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, on to item 48, the discussion, possible action, approve utilizing Mojave Educational Services Cooperative, contract number 17A-ESI-0518, temporary recruitment services with Education Services, Inc., Scottsdale, Arizona, and execute the ESI agreement for employee staffing for Mike Hendricks as the county manager, county engineer, for an estimated amount of $178,034.52, which translates to an annual salary to Mr. Hendricks of $154,875. In addition, approve the county paying the Arizona State Retirement System required alternative contribution rate of 10.53%, the current rate, for an estimated amount of $16,308.34, payable to the ASRS fund. Funding will be secured to position 100-01-0400, county administration 70%, position 20503-4301, engineering 20%, and 86-01-4960, television improvement district 10%. This item was continued by the board at the November 19th meeting. And we have Ms. O'Brien available also for questions if needed. And one person signed up to speak to this item. Mr. Robinson. Stage prop.
Thankfully, I'm not reading all that. But I said earlier that I had information about an issue regarding Mr. Hendricks. I didn't name him earlier, but there was a serious allegation made because of what happened in the firing of a county employee several years ago. I have information and evidence that would lead to, if there truly was suborning of perjury on behalf.
Mr. Robinson, if you've got evidence of any wrongdoing by a Mojave County employee, take that information and walk directly back to Mr. Matt Smith. He is the man that can make that happen.
Thank you. That's exactly what I plan to do. And I'll, in a statement of true confession, I grabbed the wrong box out of my house, but I will get the other box of information.
I thought that might be a prop.
No, it won't be a problem.
No, I thought that might be a prop.
Well, I looked in the box a few minutes ago and found out it was the wrong box. That happens, honestly.
Okay, find the right box.
Don't worry, I will.
And you pinpoint the allegation and get with Mr. Smith.
Thank you, I will.
And I invite anyone else in Mojave County, the state of Arizona, the United States of America, or the whole damn world, if there is any wrongdoing done by Mojave County, a Mojave County employee, an elected Mojave County person, get in touch with Matt Smith.
Thank you.
He is the county attorney, and he will pursue that.
Okay.
Thank you.
On another issue.
Make it brief. You're not signed up for another issue.
The clock got turned off. On another related issue to the employment contract.
That's not what you wanted to talk about, so make it brief.
Okay. Another issue with Mr. Hendricks was there was a complaint filed about the engineering aspect of his job where he said there was no finding against him for violating the Board of Technical Registration's rulings of engineers' reports. It was an unsigned report. The only reason there wasn't a finding made against him because they had no statutory authority to punish him because it did not give the engineer, the chairman of the chief engineer of the same kind of scrutiny that they do to private engineers. That complaint was filed October of 2016, and then in April of 2017 they heard it, and they ended up filing notices of reprimand against the two. And my point is that that's a problem with the way Mr. Hendricks has operated, and I'm just saying he should not be voted.
Mr. Robinson, is this a misdemeanor, a felony? Your last allegation towards Mr. Hendricks?
It was a violation of the law that requires signed engineers' reports. It was specifically.
On your way out, see Mr. Smith.
I'll talk to him. Thank you.
Chairman Watson.
Supervisor Bishop.
It's with pride and appreciation that I'm going to make the motion that we approve utilizing Mojave Educational Services Cooperative Contract number 17A-ESI-018 for the employment of County Manager Mike Hendricks as described in item 48 on the agenda.
Okay, we have a motion.
Second.
And a second. Any further discussion?
I have a question.
Mr. Supervisor Johnson.
Supervisor Bishop, in there it has a blank statement about vacation and sick days. Is that open-ended?
Mr. Chairman,
I'm asking
may I address that, Mr. Chairman?
Certainly, Mr. Hendricks.
I believe that discussion came up when we first went with the ESI contract with Mr. Johnson. He had a question of me regarding that, and my response was, I don't have a golden parachute. I don't have any protection. I'm on a year-to-year basis. If the board so chooses at any one time to terminate my services, there is no severance, and they can do so at their choosing. If the board decides that I take too much vacation time, which I probably do deserve more than I take, that the board can terminate my services. If the board decides that I am not spending enough off-hours time at work or that I'm not performing to their satisfaction, they can terminate my services. No questions asked.
Thank you, Mr. Hendricks.
Well, I guess my question still stands. Supervisor Bishop, what is it that you're bringing forward there. 'Cause it has an amendment or addendum that says sick and vacation times.
Well, Supervisor Johnson, I've turned off my computer, so the backup material is available to you as well as me, and my motion was to approve item 48 as written on the agenda.
Is that to argue about?
May I ask a question? So
Supervisor
is this different? Has it changed from contracts before?
Contracts before, excuse me, in previous contracts, going back to,
2013 or 2014.
oh, no, that's going back before your time. Trying to think.
Is Becky O'Brien
We had,
here?
I think with Walker, we had a certain amount of days off that were in there. Since Mr. Hendrickson has been in there, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe there's been any mention of vacation, sick, I don't even think holidays were put in there. And I think in Walker's it said holidays and a certain amount of time. But this one, then in the addendum that was proposed, it just said, basically, I think it was asking if we wanted to give sick days and vacation days. And so that's what I was asking. We had it in there before, we gave so many days to a previous manager, and then it's been removed from the contract. The first one, Mr. Hendricks had, I believe. And this one was, to me, was asking for one. So without a specific date in mind, obviously I'll be against voting for a contract that doesn't consider Mr. Hendricks to be sick every day, and the day he's not sick, he's on vacation.
But again, we never had it. It was never in his contract. The contract, and again, for a little history's sake, when Mike was an employee for, 30 years or so, and in 2014, after the first year, you came forward and asked that we do this by contract, and you can get your retirement, and the vote was 4-1. I was the only one who voted against doing it on contract. So, I made my state there, but if there was a problem with how we were doing the, vacation days and sick days, then I don't know why it's coming up now 5 years later, and why it didn't come up then.
It was put in as a request this time. I didn't do it.
If you take vacation days, Mike, so you get paid for every day you get off?
Do I? I get paid
No,
a
I'm
salary.
talking, no, I'm sorry. I know what you get paid, same as me.
Chairman Supervisor Angus, I get an annual salary.
Right.
I believe if this contract is like the original one, and I didn't have any doubts that it wasn't, that it says that I'm entitled to take reasonable sick and vacation days. And if the board at any time decides that what I take is not reasonable, you also can certainly take whatever actions necessary. Now, there's a couple advantages of my ESI contract. One's directly to me. I was able to take my retirement, which is a huge advantage. The disadvantage is I pay my own insurance, and I'm not under a regular, let's say, American Association of County Managers contract, which would spell out if a termination occurred, I would get severance, I would get vacation time, I would have reasonable expectation. If I didn't take all my vacation time, I would get remunerated for it, and so forth and so on. So there, and also we save the county about $4,000, which is
As long as
nominal.
you're not getting PTO that's being.
No, and I don't get
used up, and at
compensation.
the end, you get a big check.
No,
It's not
no
gonna happen.
compensation whatsoever. There's no expectation of any compensation if I'm terminated.
So it's up to us. If we think you're taking too much time, which I don't, if you take too much vacation, which I don't, then it would be up to us to make that an issue at that time.
That's correct.
All right.
Chairman
I just don't
Watson.
know what changed now.
I'd just like to say that I rarely take a day off, and I'm in that office every day of the week, sometimes on weekends, and there's rarely a day that Mike Hendricks is not in his office. So I can verify that he doesn't take very many vacation days. I think very rarely are you not there, and if I need him, he's on the phone. So that's all I can say, is that he doesn't abuse his time off. But we appointed him, or another board appointed him in 2013. we renewed his contract in 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, and 2018, and I didn't see any changes in that contract. So I don't know if Becky O'Brien can confirm that. I see she's walking down, but if there's been any changes, I'm not aware of them. Thank you, Becky.
Chairman Watson, members of the board, I've been here 2.5 years, so Mike certainly predates me as far as serving as the county manager. In the 2 extensions that I've been involved in, they are the same extensions that have occurred. There was no changes other than potential tax rates, those type of things, to the previous versus the current contract.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. O'Brien. Any further discussion? I believe we have a motion and a second on the floor. Is that correct? All right, if there's no further discussion, Madam Clerk, if you'll please call roll.
Supervisor Angus?
Yes.
Supervisor Johnson?
No.
Supervisor Bishop?
Yes.
Supervisor Gould?
Yes.
Chairman Watson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen in the audience, thank you so much for your participation today. And I believe we've reached a point where we can
Another year.
adjourn.